Good afternoon and welcome back to the afternoon session of the December 13th, 2022 public hearing and public meeting of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. We are a little behind schedule and we will begin this afternoon with public hearing item number 4 and move through the rest of the items on our public hearing agenda this afternoon. This meeting is being held via Zoom and live streamed on our YouTube channel, so you have multiple ways to watch the proceedings, and if you'd like to testify, you may do so by joining the Zoom meeting at the estimated time shown on our agenda, which can be found on our website. But again, please note we're a little behind schedule. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to Corey Harala, our Director of Preservation, to take us through the rest of the public hearing agenda.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So we'll start with public hearing item number 4, LPC 23-04483, an application for a certificate of appropriateness, number of Manhattan, block 1183, lot 53, 340 West 72nd Street, the Chatsworth Apartments and Annex individual landmark. It's a Beaux-Arts style annex to the Chatsworth Apartments, designed by John Stars Smith and built in 1905 to 06. And the application is to construct a rooftop addition.
Hey, Commissioners, the applicants have entered the hearing. Cass, you now have control of the presentation. You can unmute yourself and state your name for the record. Okay, you might not be able to unmute yourself. Hang on a second. Okay, can you unmute yourself now? Thank you.
Yes, and could you actually let me go back?
Yes.
There we go.
State your name for the record.
Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Cass Stackelberg, Higgins, Grace Barth, and Partners. Nice to be with you today. I'm joined by Richard DeMarco, Montroy Anderson DeMarco, and our client Jason Jones of Starwood Property Trust. I'm going to be running through the presentation, but Richard and Jason will be available for discussion and any questions you may all have. To begin with, the Chatsworth Apartments, the Chatsworth building is on the far right in the photograph, and the annex is on the left, highlighted in red in the site plan on the image on the left. And the scope of work that we're presenting today is really just at the roof of the annex building, the limestone clad building. And before I begin to share the design presentation, I just wanted to give you all a bit of background and context because it is important to this application and to the history of the project. Back in 2012, Richard's office and our office began working with HFC Capital on a project that involved the rehabilitation and restoration of both buildings. We came before the commission at a public hearing in January 2014, and a broad scope of work was approved at a public meeting in March 2014. 2 separate certificates of appropriateness were issued in January of 2015, one for each of the 2 buildings. And in 2019-2020, work stopped on the project. Obviously, things changed in the city in 2020, and in March of 2020, both of those permits expired. And during that time, HFC Capital went bankrupt. And Starwood Property Trust was the construction lender to HFZ. And then they are now the holder of the shares for the various units that HFC controlled. So we are now coming back with certain proposed work on behalf of Starwood Property Trust, who is eager to sort of continue the work and finish the project. We're working with the staff on a number of the modifications to the buildings that were previously part of the scope of work. But this afternoon, the scope that is before you is for a rooftop addition on the annex building where one was previously approved. That permit, as I mentioned, expired. So we are representing an addition that's actually set back a little bit further than what was approved and is less visible and is actually a smaller footprint. And I'll take you through the various aspects of the scope of work. Just beginning with some overall elevations, again, the 8-story annex building, obviously on the left, and the larger Chatsworth on the right. And the area highlighted in green is the area of work. On the left is the approved elevation from 2014. On the right is the proposed elevation. And what you can see that was approved in 2014 was a full width penthouse that had tall glazing panels, and then you'll see in greater detail clad in a pre-patinated copper. And then there was a 4-inch on center picket railing on the upper roof. And what's proposed today is an addition in the same location, the same height. It's set back about 6 feet, further back than the previous addition. The railing now is going to be just an open pipe rail, and it will be clad in a buff brick to sort of blend with the side elevation. So we'll get into greater detail in just a moment. Some historical images of both buildings that are very relevant to the overall scope of the work that's proposed. On the right is the Chatsworth. It was constructed between 1902 and 1904, and this photograph has provided the team with great evidence about the copper chenot that ran across the top of the mansard roof, and the restoration of that chenot is a key component of the overall project. On the left is the annex. The annex was completed about 2 years after the Chatsworth building was completed as an 8-story, also a residential building, and it had this very robust Beaux-Arts copper cornice that you can see in the image on the left. This high-resolution photograph is serving as a great guide for us for the restoration of that element. We do know from looking at tax photos that the cornice was removed, or the upper portion of the cornice was removed, at least by 1940. Going back to the elevation, so this is a series of the approved elevation on the left, the current elevation in the middle, and then the revised elevation on the right. And what you can see, maybe starting with the existing elevation at the center, is that at present, there is a bulkhead with the habitable space up at the top of the building. It's actually original to the building. It's off center and partial width. And then there's a water tank on the east lot line of the roof. On the left, you can see the full width addition that was approved. On the right, you can see our revised proposal, which is similar in profile and in elevation to this sort of partial width off-center bulkhead that exists today. In plan, on the left is the approved plan from 2014. On the right is the revised plan, and at center is the existing plan. And the difference in large part between what was approved back and designed and approved back in 2014 and the current proposal is an addition that obviously is more regular in footprint, but I think significantly the decision was made sort of in the intervening years, recognizing the value of this rooftop space to actually provide more outdoor space for the occupant of that penthouse. So the footprint of the addition was shrunk, the geometry of the addition was simplified, and the front edge of the addition here was pulled back. So where the approval had a setback, a full width, the addition was set back 10 feet. This proposal now is set back 16 feet. The heights are the same, so the visibility is diminished. And then I'll also just point out the existing roof plan. The existing penthouse is set back about 19 feet, so we're only about 3 feet further forward than the existing. And you can see in plan that the northern face or profile of the existing and the proposed are actually quite similar. And that's the only side of the addition that is visible. So as you'll see in our visibility studies, there is not a great distinction between what's there today and what is being proposed. The upper roof plan, again, the approved on the left, the existing on the in the middle, and then the proposed on the right. I'll just point out, you can see there's a simple pipe railing that set back the code maximum allowable 6 feet from the front edge, and it will have a much more open feeling than what was presented and approved previously with the 4-inch on center railing. In detail elevation, rendered elevation. So again, the approval called for a tall glass infill with doors, and then a tall sort of clear story. And then the entire enclosure was to be clad in a pre-patinated copper. The existing sort of off-center penthouse is currently clad in a corrugated metal that's painted a gray color. And we believe that underneath that was just a simple stucco finish, which is pretty typical for buildings of this type in this historic district, where penthouses original to these buildings were finished with sort of utilitarian, sort of pedestrian materials, stucco, buff brick, et cetera. And what we're proposing is just a simple form. It will also be clad in a buff brick with glazing directly below it. And then you can see the pipe railing running above it. One difference also just to note is that you can see my cursor here. There's an existing chimney on the far right or west lot line of the roof, and that needs to be raised up 3 feet above the roof level. So that is a change from what was presented and approved previously. But you can see actually at the center elevation that that chimney is apparent, at least in elevation. The side elevation approved on the top, existing in the middle, and proposed on the bottom. You can see that the copper cornice wraps the east side of the building and will be part of the restoration of the project. And then you can see the relative setbacks of these, the front edge, so the north edge of these 3 volumes. So 10 feet at the top, about 19 feet in the middle, and 16 feet at the bottom. So again, we're 6 feet back from what was approved back in 2014 and only about 3 feet forward of what exists today. Some details on the top left is a detail elevation illustrating the area of masonry and the glazing below, a simple galvanized painted metal door for egress from the stair, the building stair that runs through the building out onto the roof. The images on the lower left illustrate the side elevations of the annex, and there's a buff brick parapet on both sides. And our goal here is to match that finish in the cladding of the penthouse. So the idea is that it's sort of a quiet, somewhat pedestrian treatment for this now served simple volume. And the section on the right illustrates a cut through the north face of the penthouse with the brick above, stone coping, and then the glazing below. And then you can see the pipe railing set back 6 feet from the front edge of the addition. There is a mock-up on the roof, and we have photographs, both sort of what you see with your eye across the top of each of these images, and then zoomed views below. And one thing that I will point out is that the mock-up obviously is constructed on the current roof where the copper cornice does not exist yet. When we reconstruct the cornice, that element is about 3 to 5 feet taller than what is there today. So it actually obscures quite a bit of the roof, both of the existing, because it's missing less of the existing penthouse, but it will obscure quite a bit of the proposed rooftop construction. So if I can get my cursor here. So again, this is a photo looking from about 73rd and Riverside Drive, and you can see the mock-up here, and then a detailed photo on the lower left. Again, you can see just above what remains of the copper cornice, the buff-colored penthouse that is existing, and then on the upper right is a rendered view with the cornice rendered in, the restored cornice rendered into both the annex and the Chatsworth. And the lower right is a zoom view of that. So you see a little bit of the brick masonry in between the different decorative elements across the top of that cornice, and then the pipe rail. And again, this is at a very high level zoom. And one thing I'll point out is that with the buff color of the brick behind the cornice, one actually really reads now the silhouette of the restored cornice, which I think is going to be a nice change in the design. Another view from inside Riverside Park, looking south from about 74th Street. This is a view that's maybe 500 feet away. So here are the buildings back here between the trees, and then zoom views across the base. Again, you can see above what remains of the cornice here, you can see that bulkhead that exists on the roof, and then the mock-up built around it. And then the rendered view with the restored cornice rendered in, and the buff brick cladding around the existing penthouse, or the proposed penthouse rather, seen behind and through the cornice. And then just a simple pipe railing above on the roof above. And then the last two images, last two visibility studies, these are comparative views from what was included in the 2014 public meeting set and the current view. And what I'll do is I'll just sort of draw your attention to the images on the bottom, because I think the others are very difficult to see. And I think that is part of the point, is that at the distance where the addition will be visible, it is actually quite difficult to see. On the lower left, this is a zoomed view of what was approved in 2014. And as I described before, it was a full width penthouse that was clad in pre-patinated copper. And we are proposing to restore the cornice in a pre-patinated copper. So you would lose the contrast between the restored cornice and the penthouse behind it. And on the far right, lower right, is the updated proposal with the buff cladding around the penthouse. And so now we have a differentiation of materials. And I think that the legibility of that restored cornice will actually be quite a bit greater in this new treatment. One more view. Looking southeast, again, across the base of the slide on the lower left is the approved rendering from 2014 and the revised rendering from the current proposal. And again, remembering that this proposal is set back 6 feet more than what was approved. So there'll be a diminished visibility, but also the contrast between the brick masonry and the restored copper cornice, I think, will allow for the cornice to be a more legible feature up on the roof. And then finally, a photograph of the buildings as they exist today. And I'll just add, we're excited about finishing this project and finishing off the restoration, finishing off the construction up on the roof. And just to reiterate why we believe the addition at the annex is appropriate, I think really on three points. The visibility, I think, is modest. It's less than what was approved previously because the building or the addition is reduced in its width, but is also set back 6 additional feet. The materiality, it's being treated in just a simple buff brick, which is consistent with the way many penthouse features in the district are treated. And is really thought of really now as a sort of recessive feature up on the roof. And then finally, just thinking about the effect on the landmark, which is an individual landmark, but also included in the historic district. I think in particular, the restoration of the cornice at the annex, but also the Chenot at the Chatsworth, and even the integration of this rooftop addition. These together will all be enhancements for the building and the district itself. Thank you, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions? Okay, I don't see any questions. Let's move to public testimony. We may have questions after that. If you're in the meeting and would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand so we can identify you, and I will turn it over to Gregory Kala to take us through the testimony.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We had a few signups beforehand on this issue, so I will be going through those. The first being Megan Fitzpatrick from Landmark West. So Megan, I will be promoting you to panelist now. So if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, Commissioners. Megan Fitzpatrick for Landmark West. The Landmark West Certificate of Appropriateness Committee notes the restoration of the copper Chenot and cornice on the Chatsworth and Annex that was promised as part of the original application yet remain absent. Realization of these elements should take precedent and be followed through in good faith before other undertakings begin. In regards to this application and echoing our previous testimony in 2014, the committee would not find it objectionable to build a code-compliant rooftop addition to the annex. However, we oppose the proposed changes to massing and material of this new application. Building a partial width addition disrupts the dominant symmetry. Symmetry is a key identifying feature of the Chatsworth and Annex style, which defines its individual landmark status. Our C of A committee favors the previously approved 2014 proposal, which featured a full width rooftop addition with metal cladding, as we believe it visually complements the Mansard, Chatsworth, and Annex ensemble. The Certificate of Appropriateness Committee advises a revision of this addition. We appreciate the restoration proposals and hope they are restored accurately and timely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Megan. And next up will be Josette Amato. And Josette, I am promoting you to panelist now. So if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Josette Amato, West End Preservation Society. Well, here we are back at the incredible Chatsworth, where being a sensational Beaux-Arts landmark always means more. This proposal appears to be pared down from the presentation at the community board, so we hope some of the less desirable elements don't inch back in at a later date. We once again heartily support the restoration of the cornice. It would be wonderful to see this crowning glory atop the annex revived. It would also help hide the proposed addition. This is one of those rare beauties that has clear sight lines a long distance away on Riverside Drive, Riverside Park, and West 72nd Street. So whatever sits on top should be worthy of this landmark. We're not sure this makes it. The existing structure looks so much smaller in comparison to the mock-up and renderings. The proposal has been set back on the east elevation, but the north face adds to the existing structure. The approved design, though larger, blended into the rooftop with the cornice. This is not the case here. So we would ask that the addition do everything in its power to be less visible while accompanying one of the finest Beaux-Arts buildings we have within this historic district. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Josette. And we will now be hearing from Clary Newelt. So Clary, I will be promoting you to panelist now. So if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You will have 3 minutes to speak. Hello, Clary?
I just unmuted here.
Yes. Hi.
I'm a member of CB7's Preservation Committee, and I'm going to be speaking individually today on some aspects. I would prefer to do so after my colleague Mark Diller speaks on behalf of CB7, if you would be willing to do it that way. Otherwise, I'll talk now.
Of course, yes, I could do that. So
Thanks so
just
much.
give me one moment then. Okay. So Mark, I'm going to be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please just unmute your line and state your name for the record, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mark Diller, on behalf of Community Board 7's Preservation Committee. I thank my colleague Clary for the courtesy to go first. I am testifying on behalf of CB7, but we only have a Preservation Committee resolution for you today. The reason is that there was a great deal more to this application when we heard it at committee in November. That confusion spilled into the full board meeting in December. And so we reconsidered this at preservation, but there isn't time to bring you a full board vote. I want to note for these purposes that there was at some point a suggestion that the confusion was authored by the applicant, and that is not the case. In fact, we are grateful that the applicant came back to the Preservation Committee in December and clarified, and also with a much reduced proposal. So now we're only talking about the annex rooftop, but it's appropriate to say thank you to them in this context for coming back. This is indeed a unique site. We have already heard that this is a commanding presence literally at the foot of Riverside Park and where Riverside Drive meets West 72nd Street. So its visibility is very much an issue both from 72nd Street, from Riverside Drive for blocks away and within the park. The designation report, I believe it's on page 11, speaks to the beauty of these buildings, the Beaux-Arts masterpieces that are defined on their primary facades by their symmetry. The addition that on the annex that the LPC approved in 2015 carries forward that symmetry, and the current proposal destroys it. And so we are, unfortunately, as a committee, and we hope to bring this to the full board, seek that this application be disapproved. Its disapproval should be based on the lack of symmetry. The composition now would leave a giant gap tooth without David Letterman involved, that would render the restored cornice in an odd visible way. And the previous application, while it did inform the space behind the restored cornice, was a nice homage to the mansard roof on the main Chatsworth building. That goes away too with this application. The fenestration on the new proposal is utilitarian, yes, but it is also skewed and modern in a way that is neither classical nor appropriately differentiated. So utilitarian works when the rooftop addition is really not visible, but here it really is. The painted metal door completes the elimination of any hope of the symmetry that defines these facades, and then the height and the bulk of this thing just doesn't work. So we believe that this would not be appropriate even in an historic district. This is an individual landmark in a commanding setting. It is manifestly inappropriate as the crown to this jewel. We ask for you to disapprove this application. I thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark. And we will then be hearing back from Clary. So Clary, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, my name is Clary Newell. As I said, I am a member of CB7, the Preservation Committee as well. I strongly support our committee's recommendation to you that this rooftop addition at the annex be disapproved on the grounds that Mark largely spoke about and that are in our written statement. As others have noted, there are lots of aspects to this application that were presented initially to the CB7 Preservation Committee, but are now before staff. They haven't gone away, other than I believe that the initially proposed privacy screens, which were very, very visible and intrusive, have gone away. But there are a number of other things on the rooftop that are now before the commission, although not the immediate subject of today's hearing, and I wanted briefly to address those. First and foremost, there's a very large round brick historic chimney near the rear of the main Chatsworth North building that comes out of the roof. It's quite elegant. It's in its functional way. When the applicant came to you in 2012, 13, 14, they said they needed to extend that chimney upwards by about 15 feet. And as your permit at the time states, it would be about 15 feet. You gave permission for them, or you approved their doing that in brick. I'd point out by comparison, the fabulous, very, very tall, much taller brick chimneys of the wonderful Con Ed building at 59th Street and West End Avenue. So they never did that. They combined apartments, they renovated apartments, they sold apartments. It's now 8 years later. They never extended the chimney. Now they've come to you and asked to get approval for extending the chimney rather than brick, continuing the brick of the existing chimney. They want to now go up something like 15 feet with painted sheet metal. My point about that is that that sheet metal, it would be, this chimney is round. It doesn't show that way on the drawings that we saw. It reads as square or rectangular. It's in fact round. So you're talking about bent sheet metal, one or more seams. They acknowledged it would have to be painted from time to time to be maintained. I strongly urge that as the commission and its staff looks at this chimney, if you buy the notion that the chimney has to be extended, that the only appropriate material to do so is brick and not painted sheet metal. Secondarily, and I will be very quick about this, there are a whole bunch of other accretions that are proposed for the rooftop of the north building of the main Chatsworth. They are intended to be amenities for the proposed owners or the prospective owners of the two new penthouses up there. They are very large in the mock-ups. One is an exterior staircase on the east facade of the east penthouse. And then,
Sorry, I'm terribly sorry. You're above time. If you could please sum up your points.
of course, absolutely. There are also two pergolas. I don't think those have been withdrawn. I just strongly suggest that you give a very close look to the size and materials of the proposed staircase and the pergolas. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay. And next up, we will be hearing from Terry Darwish. Terry, I will be promoting you to panelist now. So if you could please state your name for the record and unmute your line, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Hello, Terry, are you with us?
Oh, apologies. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, let me take it from the top. Terry Darwish, I would like to thank Chair Carroll and the commissioners for hearing me out. I respectfully request that LPC 23-04483 of the proposed construction of a 9th floor on top of the 8th story roof of the Chatsworth Annex be denied in full. Chatsworth's 2013 COFA applications asked Landmarks for permission to restore the facades, replace the windows, and modify some rooftop accretions at both the Chatsworth and its annex. And the Chatsworth has failed to deliver on its decade-long commitments to safeguard, much less restore, these magnificent and remarkably intact masterpieces dating from the last Gilded Age. Both the Chatsworth and the annex have failed their 2019 facade inspections and have been deemed unsafe and hazardous. The window replacement program is incomplete and seriously flawed. To date, only the build out of the 13th and 14th floors on the north and south towers of the Chatsworth have seen the light of day. That is, no facade restoration has been completed. The window work is far from done, and none of the restoration elements have been done. I would turn your attention simply to the matter of the Chenot as illustrative of the developments at the Chatsworth and the annex to date. These were promised in the original applications, and the applicant asserts that replicating these Chenot, copper Chenot, atop the copper cornices will serve the purpose of somewhat blunting the visibility of these additional stories atop these classical Beaux-Arts compositions. As I understand it, the base, columns, and capitals is what makes these facades so classically, beautifully Beaux-Arts. Asymmetrical things on top of the mansard roof or the annex are completely inappropriate. In the first instance, this is an appalling misconstrual of the Beaux-Arts element being a Chenot. A copper Chenot is meant to be the crest, the corona, the tiara, if you will, that crowns the elaborate goings-on below. You can look to the Chatsworth's neighbors, the Doralton, the Ansonia, the Apthorpe, and on to understand how these Chenot provide a sense of place. When you see them, you know you're in Paris, maybe Vienna, or the Upper West Side. A Chenot is intended to delineate the building below and is always meant to be read against the sky above. There remains plenty of sky above the Chatsworth and annex to this day. To utilize a Chenot as a smokescreen to mitigate otherwise inappropriate, highly visible, and ill-advised additions that are way visible for 10 to 25 feet above these proposed Chenot is inappropriate, if not abhorrent. And I might say in the second instance, probably the primary one, these Chenot, much like the deteriorated or disappeared copper cornices and
Oh,
coping.
Terry, I'm terribly sorry. If you could please sum up your points, you're above time.
In sum, I acknowledge that the promise of replicating Chanot is like dangling catnip before ardent preservationists, but it will, at the Chatsworth and Annex, remain a phantasm and never get built. They would block the views, the panoramic and highly priceless views from these newly privatized residences. And I humbly request that this commission dismiss this egregiously visible, non-contextual, disruptive, and lopsided annex edition as completely inappropriate to these Beaux-Arts beauties. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Terry. So that is all for our signups through our signups beforehand, and I do not see any further hands raised. So as previously noted by CB7 members, they recommend disapproval, and I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Carroll. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm going to turn it back to the applicant to respond, but before doing so, I just want to note that any work that is being approved at staff level will be looked at very rigorously and very carefully by our very expert staff to ensure that that work all conforms to our rules. And so I'd like to focus our discussion on the item that is before us, which is the penthouse addition. And I'll turn it over to you, Cass, if you would like to respond to any of the comments.
Yes. Can you unmute me?
Oh, you're unmuted.
You can just click on your screen. And then
Oh, okay, sorry. Just wagging my lips at everybody. Thank you. And so this has been, over the years, it's been a very, focal project for the neighborhood. The opportunity to go back before community boards, Sevens Landmarks or Preservation Committee twice, just in the last 2 months. We went back last week, really just to clarify some misunderstandings I think that were had. We didn't change the proposal. We had support at the November meeting, and then when we represented last week, after removing the privacy screens that the community board objected to, they voted against the proposal. So it's been an interesting recent process. But let me focus on the comments about asymmetry, and I'm wondering, Abby, am I able to control the slides? Because I'd like to go back to slide 4,
if
I
you just
may.
click on your screen, you'll have.
Okay.
Perfect.
Great. A lot has been said about this issue and problem with asymmetry. And I think it's an interesting point. I think if one were merely to compare the left and right elevations, so the previously approved and the proposed, yes, we are going from a somewhat symmetrical condition to an asymmetrical condition. But what I think it's important to remember, one, is that we're looking at the building in elevation, which is not how one sees this building. And two, we know that the building was constructed originally with the volume that is currently, the asymmetrical volume that is currently up on the roof, and the water tank, which is off-center and also asymmetrical to the facade. These features were set back 15 feet, 20 feet back from the cornice, and were designed as part of the original vision of the building, as part of the composition. Obviously, the front facade is rigorously symmetrical, but as with many buildings, in order to make them operate, you need things like water and roof access and things like that. And those elements, as designed, were set back 15, 20 feet from the original cornice. What we are proposing is something actually much more akin to what was there historically than what was approved back in 2014. And that's not to say there was a problem with what was approved in 2014, but this is really just to say what we are proposing here is also appropriate. And it's appropriate because it is very similar in form and massing to what was originally built. And I think the change in materiality is actually a real advantage here, because we are going to something that is pedestrian in its cladding, this sort of brick, simple buff brick treatment. And I do think that will be an enhancement to the restored cornice. And finally, I'll just say that our client is fully committed and excited, as we are, about seeing the top of these two buildings, both the annex and the Chatsworth, being restored back to their documented historic condition. So with that, I'm happy to take any other questions, or I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. And I think I'll just add also that, of course, the restoration work and the restoration of these cornices is part and parcel of the proposal for the rooftop additions. And so any sign-offs and for the project would require all of that work to be complete. Okay, commissioners, do we have any other questions? Okay, I don't see any questions, so I'm sending you all requests to unmute so that we can move to our discussion. All right, Commissioner Holford Smith, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Chen, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion. And we've heard how the history of this project and how the commission has approved additions on both buildings. And today we are looking at the addition on the annex building. The commission previously found a larger, wider, and more forward addition to be appropriate. And in that context, in that amount of visibility, found this design with glass and copper to be appropriate. The application now seeks a different approach, which is an approach to design something that is more similar to the original bulkhead, which is narrower in width, set back further, although it is still 6 feet in front of the existing, and in a similar stucco material. And so that from distances, I think the applicant's point is that the stucco will allow the cornice, the amount of stucco that you see above the cornice will allow that to be a primary reading and legible, and that the addition will be recessive and sort of blend into the backdrop of taller buildings. So we have many renderings with Zoom photos to show the proposed visibility, and we'll begin our discussion. And the one additional feature is that additional chimney on the west side of the penthouse. And again, this is a good slide to be on slide 10. You can see that just the tip of the fenestration would be visible between the elements of the cornice. But for the most part, you're seeing the stucco and the handrail. Okay, so let's begin that discussion. Commissioner Gustafson, would you like to start this one?
Know how I knew you were going to do that. Okay, I was frankly surprised at the volume of the testimony here, and I listened carefully to it, but I'm not sure we're addressing the same issues. Let's start with this. It's very visible from all sorts of places, and so we can't argue about visibility. The question is, what do we want to see? And I think the rendering that you just had up here has the three elements of it need to be looked at separately. The restoration of that cornice, which I don't think anyone can fuss with. I think the existing original rooftop addition, that's there now. It's the section in the middle that's off center. The off-centeredness bothers some people. It doesn't bother me. It does. The word you used, I think, Chair Carroll, was that it recedes. It's hidden in part by the cornice and then recedes below the original rooftop addition. And of course it is substantially less obtrusive than what was there that we approved already once before. I think this is appropriate. I think it's different from what they submitted the first time, very different, but that's not the measure. It's not whether it is has the symmetry of the first one or the design of the first one. It's a different approach, and I think it is appropriate.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Shamir Baran.
Thanks. So firstly, obviously commend and hope that the restored cornice occurs, because it would be a remarkable thing to have that return. I do think, though, and I was not here on the commission when it was last approved in the form that it took. And I don't think I would have supported that, because I think that this building should not have a visible addition that says it exceeds and is sort of above and beyond that really strong cornice. So, and therefore, while I agree that what they're proposing today is more like what exists there today, I actually think that visibility should be minimized. So therefore, by the 6 feet, pulled back to exactly the face of what exists there today. And then for it to be able to do what it needs to do beyond that. So, as proposed. But actually, and so that in my mind is absolutely better than symmetry, non-symmetry. It is not visible more than what was existing, original was visible. And therefore the question of symmetry or not doesn't enter this. They can do what they're proposing in my mind, but it should be pulled back. That's the 6 feet.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Holford Smith.
Yes, well, interesting conversation. I think that I can find this application appropriate as presented. I think it's actually more appropriate than the 2014 proposal that went all the way across the roof and was the same color as the new cornice. I think that would have made the cornice sort of disappear and be much less legible. I think seeing the cornice against either background buildings or against the buff brick will make it stand out even more. And I think that buildings of this type do have asymmetrical appurtenances on their roofs, and I don't find that that's objectionable. And I think that the fact that you see it from such a distance does not detract from the overall reading of this building. So I find it appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chapin.
Yes, I agree with those remarks. I think this is better than the original, the last approved, plan for the rooftop, because that appeared to be part of the building, not as an addition, I think, and which is what we usually look for in these rooftop creations. And I think the fact that it's asymmetrical is fine. If it could be pulled further back and be less visible, that would be fine. But I think it's not unusual to see this kind of rooftop accretion. And because it's so far away, even though it's an individual landmark, I think it is acceptable.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldblum.
I'm in general agreement with everybody. And this kind of reminds me of the Flatiron Building, where we had a similar situation where there was a rooftop addition that was actually being raised up a little bit, where the color of the stucco was an issue. And the reason that it was an issue is because of the pronounced profile line of the cornice at that building. And I think that here, one of the reasons why I think this is an improvement over the previous application is because the light color, I think, forms a better backdrop on for the cornice and kind of shows it off a little bit better. In a situation where this is a north-facing building, it will very rarely have direct sun on it. So I think that kind of effect is a modest improvement. I agree with John and the others regarding the appropriateness of the addition. I think the symmetry is not really relevant given how the building is seen in context. And given the history of the building's rooftop accretions, I don't think it's a necessary point. If they could pull it back further, that'd be great, but I think that it is appropriate as shown.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Devonshire.
I would like to see it pulled back a little bit too, but I think the differentiation between the addition and the new Chanel will be enough that it's not going to be an issue at all. It's far enough off the street level, so I can approve it.
Okay, Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. The commissioner said, John and Ann and Michael all said it very well.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Jefferson.
I agree that the symmetry, asymmetrical question has been answered. And what I was looking at is what actually do you see? What's dominant? And this Chanel cornice is the most powerful thing you will see. And with the light background of the penthouse, it would add a lot to this building. So I approve it.
Great. Okay, thank you. And I agree with all of your comments. And I also think that not only the light color and the smaller size help it to recede behind the cornice, but I think it also will disappear against the backdrop of the taller buildings, which you currently see behind the building. So I think that also provides a context that makes this recessive approach appropriate. So I think we have support to approve it as is. We can certainly ask the applicants if they want to voluntarily work with the staff on pulling it back further, but I heard that enough commissioners comfortable with it as presented. So we'll go ahead and make that motion. Commissioner Gustafson, would you like to read that motion?
In the matter of LPC 23-04483, 340 West 72nd Street, the Chatsworth Apartments and Annex, an individual landmark, a Beaux-Arts style annex to the Chatsworth Apartments designed by John Sharsmith and built in 1905-06. Application is to construct a rooftop addition. I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the West End Collegiate Historic District Extension. I further note that the siting of this individual landmark renders the roofline highly visible from multiple vantage points, including Riverside Park. I recommend approval, finding that construction of the rooftop addition will not eliminate any significant architectural features, that the visibility of the proposed rooftop addition will be partially screened and minimized by the recreation of the historic roof cresting, which will restore a missing significant architectural feature to the building, that the proposed addition is smaller than the previously approved addition, and the views of the addition over the primary facade will be seen in context with taller buildings in the background, that the size, placement, materiality, and massing of the addition are in keeping with penthouses found on buildings of this age and style, and its simple horizontal massing and brick cladding will harmonize with the building below and make it a discrete presence at the roof, and that the work will not detract from the special architectural or historic character of the individual landmark.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Holford Smith, would you second that motion?
I second it.
Okay, thank you. Mark, will you call the vote? Mark here. Okay, Gregory, would you be able to call the vote?
Yes.
Okay.
How would I just say call the vote?
Just call out our names and we'll say aye or nay.
Okay.
Sarah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
I could not get this darn thing on. So Commissioner Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
9 in favor, none opposed. The motion passes.
That's approved. Thank you.
My apologies.
We'll move to the next item.
Thank you,
Thanks.
commissioners.
We'll now move to public hearing item number 5, LPC 23-04321, an application for a certificate of appropriateness, number of Manhattan, block 1245, lot 24, 471 West End Avenue in the Riverside West End Historic District Extension 1. This is an altered Renaissance Revival style row house, originally designed by McKenby and White, built in 1885 to 86, and again later altered. The application is to alter the facade and construct rooftop and rear yard additions.
Okay, thank you. And before we get started, sorry, Abby, I just want to note for the record that Commissioner Holford Smith is recused on this item and has left the meeting. Sorry, Abby, go ahead.
Sorry, my apologies. The applicants have entered the hearing. Sam, you now have control of the presentation. You can advance the slides using your arrow keys or your mouse. And then if you can state your name for the record, you may begin.
Can you put the first slide up?
You just need to advance using your arrow keys or your mouse. Perfect.
There we are. Thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners. I'm Sam White from PBGW Architects, the architect for 471 West End Avenue, and the owners of 471 is in the Riverside West End Historic District, even if it's misspelled. It is on the block of West End Avenue between 82nd Street and 83rd Street. On the west side, you'll see in the, if I could just, on the Sanborn map there, that the 471 is a townhouse that is sandwiched between two large apartment buildings on West End Avenue. The relevance of this is that the building does not participate in the donut created by the townhouses on 82nd and 83rd Street. And even though we are going to be extending the building to the back, it will not extend past the apartment buildings and therefore will have no impact on the donut. Let's just see if we can go to down here. Back up. This is a photograph of the front of the building and the rear of the building, taken recently. Let's just say here is the context on the west side of West End Avenue, with the building in the middle of the blocks between the two large apartment buildings, 465 and 473. This is the opposite side of the street with another apartment building and a public school. So I'd say it's a pretty typical block on West End Avenue, with the exception of the fact that it has this townhouse in the middle of it. Here is a photograph taken presumably from a helicopter showing the relationship of the applicant building 471 to the buildings on either side of it. And then here is a drawing showing in elevation the relationship of 471 to 465 on the left and 473 on the right. This drawing sort of traces the past and hopefully future history of the building. The drawing in the middle is a drawing of the existing conditions of the building. The drawing on the right shows our proposal, which I'll get into in detail in a minute. And the drawing on the left shows our attempt to reconstruct what the original elevation of this building looked like. We don't have drawings of the building, and we are working from oblique archival photographs, but it's pretty accurate in terms of what was there. And so we'll stand by that. It didn't stay this way for long. I mean, the building was built designed in 1885 by McKinley and White, built in 1886 by David H. King, who was the builder of Strivers Row, the King model houses. He also built the Madison Square Garden from McKinley and White. So he was home team. And the development in this case was for 6 private houses, 5 of which were connected by party walls, and the 6th was separated by a garden. 471 is the 6th of those. It was separated from the other 5 by a garden. Just the complex for a minute, unfortunately, sort of where was the landmarks law when we really needed it? This was really an amazing set of buildings, but is no longer. But 471 is still here. The difference between 471 and the other buildings, 471 has a flat roof. The other buildings have pitched roofs with slate roofs, a lot of architectural ornament up at roof level. But all the buildings have these striping created by 2 different colors and textures of brick. All the buildings have round-headed window openings, and all the buildings have high first floors reached by a long stoop. The stoop, in fact, is the first thing to change due to the widening of West End Avenue, that by 1910, based on the proposed widening of West End Avenue, the stoop was removed and the door at the Piano Nobile was abandoned in favor of a door at basement level, as shown on this axonometric here. So that's 1910, which is now, 25 years after the building was designed. 5 years later, a lot goes on with this building. A rooftop addition is built with a very high ceiling. A huge dormer is installed, which cuts through the middle third of the cornice. And then the windows at the bottom half of the building are completely reconfigured, calling for a covering of the facade below there with a form of stucco that I'll explain in a minute. So We're now getting closer to where we ended up. By 1939, the building was clearly a multiple dwelling with changes in the multiple dwelling law on the building code. A fire escape was put on the front. It has a steel stair running down the middle of it. It had an elevator. There is, for the record, absolutely no trace of any original architecture within the interior of this building. And here's a 1940 tax lot photo showing that the conditions that we see today in the middle have been around for about 82 years. That covering on the bottom half of the building, we believe, was a sort of form of cementitious material intended to replicate limestone. It's scored like limestone blocks. In the tax photo, you can see that it was about the color of limestone. And sometime in the past, I think with the sort of deterioration of the structural joints in the intervening masonry openings started to fail. The limestone cracked, and so a previous owner painted it. This is a comparison of the, not a comparison at all, this is the existing elevation as seen on the left with an axonometric shown on the right. Here is our proposal drawn on the left with a axonometric again on the right. And then this drawing shows the elements that we would have to change if our proposal is approved. Starting with the massing, we are proposing to extend the building 20 feet to the rear to create a 30-foot rear yard. We're proposing to add an additional story, which would be set back and out of the sight line. Because the current top floor has a ceiling height of 15 feet, we are going to be lowering the roof of that top floor so that the additional floor that we're adding, a new fifth floor, will only increase the height of this building by 6 feet 5 inches. So it's not really going to appear to be a full story, and it is out of the sight line thanks to the fact that we are retaining the sloped roof in the front. Here is the sort of catalog of the elements that were introduced as part of all of those subsequent interventions, starting with the stucco and paint covering the bottom half of the building, the dormer that cuts through the middle of the cornice, the slate roof on the top, fire escapes. Obviously, the windows have been changed. There are no more of those large round arched window openings. And then some masonry elements at the steps that lead you down to the basement to get into the house. We think that these are elements that we are proposing to remove, as you will see. There are also elements that really are sort of celebrate the glory of this particular building. The brick in essentially one color but two different finishes. The terracotta cornice, and even cut with the middle third removed, is just an extraordinary thing. The wonderful heads of the windows in the upper floors. I mean, these are the things that we would like to call attention to in our renovation. And here is essentially our proposal, comparing the photograph on the left with a drawing on the right. And what we're trying to do here is reconstructive surgery. I mean, this is a house, and the existing building sort of not only doesn't really seem like a house, it doesn't have the conventional residential hierarchies, but also I think that the original sort of balance of the elevation has been altered by, first of all, by the stucco on the bottom, which cuts the house, the facade, right in half. So it's a sort of an object lesson in bad proportions. And then the rooftop addition and the dormer put a lot of attention up at the top, so it's really thrown off balance from what was original. And so what you see on the right is what our proposal is. We're proposing to add a new facade to cover the existing stucco. That facade would use the same brick as is used on the upper floors, but creating a slightly different elevation than what was there originally. Square-headed windows instead of round-headed windows. We're not obviously not restoring the original front door position. We have to lower the door with a modified stoop, preserving the 3.5-story facade, though, by removing the cornice by removing the dormer to try to bring the attention down to the facade rather than to the roof. We're proposing to change the slate roof to copper. And the reason for this is that the slate roof was original to the other 5 buildings, but not to this building. This building had a flat roof originally. And we think that the slate roof is implying a kind of a level of architectural intention that was not true to the original design. We think that the copper standing seam has a more almost transient and lighter quality, both visually and symbolically, and therefore helps to return the center of gravity visually of this building to the bottom 3.5 stories. Similarly, removing the dormer does the same thing. We're adding that other story. You see it above that dotted line. It would be clad in a metal panels and a light gray finish set back so that you do not see it from the street. This is a process drawing showing what you would have to remove from the building and then what you would add to the building to go from the existing conditions on the left to the proposed conditions on the right. And then this is a comparison on the basis of drawings of the existing on the left to the proposed on the right. This is the rear elevation, and we are, as I say, extending the rear about 20 feet out into the backyard to create a 30-foot rear yard. And we really are making the rear elevation a design which is not typical for a lot of townhouses around there. I mean, I think the drawing on the left is much more typical, but we're trying to create an elevation that has some hierarchies to it that relates to the scale of the garden at the bottom and relates to the fact that there is a top to this building with a large window at the top. That rear elevation would be covered with gray terracotta panels set as a rain screen. These are a series of sections comparing existing, in this case, which is drawn solid, with proposed, which is drawn dotted. What it shows is that everything we're doing is out of the sight line as established from across the street. It shows that very high ceiling on the 4th floor. One wonders who and what moved into that building at one point around 1915. But Christopher Gray isn't with us anymore, and so we can't find that out easily. But we are proposing, as you will see, to remove that 5th floor roof, make a lower ceiling height on the 4th floor, add another story above, increasing the height of the building by 6 feet 5 inches. This is a section looking the other way with the same thing, the high 4th floor, I'm sorry, and then the lower 4th floor and the 5th floor addition. So that the building, when finished, would have this relationship to 465 West End Avenue on the left and 473 West End Avenue on the right. Not significantly different from what it has now, except that we think it would enhance the block in a way that the current building does not. We paid a lot of attention to what was going on at ground level here. As I say, we've restored a smaller stoop. We think that the choreography of coming into this building will be enhanced by coming up a few steps to get into the front door, and then it allows us to create a small recessed area for a service entrance. The whole thing is enclosed in a metal picket fence, which is what we see in those archival photographs. And then there you will see that there are elements around the front door on the left that are sort of traditional to the front doors of this period. We are picking up on the brick pattern above, using the one color of brick in 2 different textures to create the striping that you see. Our windows will have flat heads rather than arched heads. And we're introducing a 3rd color of brick in the field there to differentiate our lower half facade from the original upper half facade. The front door itself will be a collage of elements which are part of this, of traditional front doors of that period: wood paneling, decorative terracotta, small paned windows, lights surface mounted onto the brick. And these are the materials that you will see as you're standing at the front door. The two in the center of that are the two bricks and the two different finishes, the smooth and the rough. They're actually slightly different color. And then on the far left is the third color that you'd be introducing as a kind of a dot to differentiate the new brick pattern. And then there are terracotta ornamental elements. There's a quarry tile surrounding the door and black for the color of the windows and the railing. Because we cannot take off that stucco. I mean, that is really on there. We went up yesterday with an electric hammer to try to see if that stucco came off easily. And it's truly an immortal part of the fabric of that facade. It comes off as a powder form only with a lot of work. So we're proposing to create our new facade with a white of brick added to the face of the building with a water table at the top, affecting the transition from the new design down below to the existing brick patterns up above. The skylight will have two parts to it. It will fix the vertical section, operable windows, and the slope section, which follows the slope of the roof, is shown there. The height of the mansard roof remains. That helps us to screen the additions up above and also create some privacy for a deck that we are putting in front of this building on the 4th floor overlooking West End Avenue. The skylights are something you see a lot more of down in Greenwich Village and around Gramercy Park, but it would appear that there are some artists who have moved up to the west side over the last 100 years or so, and so it's not an unusual or unprecedented architectural element in the Upper West Side. On the roof, we're proposing to use pre-patinated copper for the standing seam, the light-colored metal panels for the rooftop addition, and then the cable railings and black painted trim. Again, the copper roofs are, these are all pictures taken from the Upper West Side. So the copper roofs are an element that is part of the landscape up there. And it does, I think, it's successful in the way in which it detaches itself visually from the masonry down below. They do look like two separate things. Which is our goal here. The back will have the gray terracotta rain screen, light gray paneling on the rooftop additions, the bulkheads, and then black painted trim and metal trim around the windows. Now, these are plans. The house will be sold as a single family residence. It's probably going to be a little bit larger than what you and I live in, but the intent is to create a residence that will justify the expense of buying this building and making a significant renovation to it and additions to it. So it has multiple bedrooms, but it is seen as a family house principally and intended to work that way. The top floor where there was the big window will have a gym on the left here with a big window looking out toward down the donut towards the river. This is a drawing we made of the mock-up, which we built on top to show that what we were proposing would not be seen from the street. The mock-up only had to be 6 feet 5 inches tall because that's as tall as as much as we're adding to the height of the building with our extra story. We checked the sight lines from both 82nd and 83rd Street where there are openings, and we made these drawings to show our neighbors what the impact of our vertical and horizontal expansion would be on their building. They were not thrilled, but they have to admit that they understand what we're doing. And this is a view of that backyard. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. And we do have some questions. Commissioner Shamir Baran, please go ahead.
You may have said it, and maybe I missed it, but one more time, please explain why it is that you decided not to return to the historic elevation with the two arched openings in the front and the entry where it is with the tall stoop.
Well, as Commissioner, for starters, because the original elevation depended on a stoop that would now go halfway out onto West End Avenue. It was a very high door. So you would have either the choice of, let me just get back to that. Bear with me. There we are. So either we'd have a high door, so we extend the opening, or we would, or you'd have to lower that arch. But in general, we thought that this elevation, the bottom half of this elevation had been lost, and we were, while we were interested in sort of capturing what we thought was the spirit of the building as expressed through the brick patterning, we just were not interested in a replication of the original building with the extending down to those windows, arch windows with the tiny little panes. It just seemed to be a little bit more archaeological than we thought was appropriate.
Okay, so to be clear though, it could be done if the door were taller. If the opening were taller and lower to the street down.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I don't see any other questions at this time, so we'll move to public testimony. If you're in the meeting and would like to testify on this item, please raise your hand so we can identify you, and I will turn it over to Gregory Collett to take us through the testimony.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We received a number of signups beforehand, so we will be running through those first. The first is Megan Fitzpatrick from Landmark West. So Megan, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. Megan Fitzpatrick for Landmark West. The Landmark West Certificate of Appropriateness Committee appreciates the revival of this long-neglected holdout, which has been altered so many times in its lifetime, it's hard to sometimes delineate elements of its original glory. Thankfully, we have a well-documented history. In this application, there are some attempts to highlight the original design, but the proposed plans will further remove the authenticity of this row house. Raising the entranceway and returning to a brick facade on the first floor are strong steps towards restoring the primary facade to its original condition. However, why was this not pursued wholeheartedly? The proposed entrance and diapered Morse code brick pattern does not relate in any way to the once dominant alternating brick string courses pierced by the arches of the parlor level. Today's proposal ignores the original fanlight entrance door and first floor window. This decision lacks historical reference to anything in this district, let alone McKim-Mead White, in favor of a suburban split-level entry motif. We feel this was a missed opportunity. Further, the applicant ignores the original features, while introducing even more new ones in the form of skylights, referencing 4 precedents, only one of which is on the Upper West Side, but not even from this district. Our C of A committee is concerned that with the introduction of this application, what was originally a 3-story building will reach almost 6 stories in height. The rear yard extension also deviates from typical row house style rear yards in materials and in design that looks foreign in the context of other row houses of this district. Lowering this bulkhead to code minimum would begin to alleviate some of the visibility concerns. The Landmark West Certificate of Appropriateness Committee urges the applicant and the Commission to minimize the size of the bulkheads as much as possible and more closely reference the original design. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Megan. Next up, we'll be hearing from Josette Amato. So Josette, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Josette Amato, West End Preservation Society. 471 is one of the luckiest and most ignored townhouses on West End Avenue. It's one of the luckiest because this Renaissance revival remains standing, albeit a little worse for wear. We are delighted that the applicant has seen the beauty in this building as we who pass by it every day. The original 6 buildings by McKim, Mead, and White were a sight to behold when originally constructed. While the siblings took center stage, 471 West End remained connected to the family with its like facade design and garden gate. Embracing and revitalizing remaining details on the West End facade pays homage to the history of the building. We would love to have seen a more intense brick banding on the lower portion, as the original was so extraordinary. We do like the copper roof, but not at the expense and demolition of the existing slate tiled roof. While this was not original to 471, it has been on this site since 1912, more than 100 years. It was added while the other townhouses stood and while William Mead was still alive. It is a reasonable assumption that the roof addition was designed to be a companion to its siblings, though not as ornate. We heard concerns were taken into account by the applicant, and we thought reduced height on the bulkhead, but it's difficult to ascertain where and what these changes were. And while we appreciate the proposal included several photos with similar rooftop additions, none of them are found in this particular historic district. While only a handful of slate tile roofs remain on West End Avenue, it seems a disservice to demolish one of them rather than integrate it into their new design. The rear facade is indeed a mess. However, taking a messy but delicate townhouse and exploding it on steroids should not be the desired outcome. We find this full width, full height, unnecessary and intrusive to the collective rear yards. Its mass overwhelms not only the original house, but also the adjacent buildings. It will swallow up 6 floors on either side and turn already darkened corners into the cask of Amontillado. We believe a more modest height rear yard addition would be of greater benefit to this property and its surrounds. We respectfully ask the Commission not to approve this as proposed and require modifications be made to this design. Thank you for considering our comments.
Okay, thank you so much, Josette. Next up, we'll be hearing from John Graham from BSNY. So John, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you. Hello, John, are you with us?
Sorry. Good afternoon, Commissioners. John Graham for the Victorian Society in New York. We're pleased to see that this early McKim, Mead, and White townhouse, the last survivor in what was once a group of 6, is getting attention after suffering a devastating fire several years ago. However, we have a few questions and concerns regarding the proposed facade. We appreciate that the plan for the 2nd and 3rd floor fenestration is to largely restore according to the historic elevation. However, we are perplexed by the proposed designs for the garden and parlor floor entrances with decorative brickwork as they diverge completely from the historic elevation without any clear reason. In the current proposed facade, the scale of the front door and garden entrance are very similar and thus seem to compete for attention. Furthermore, the new oculus window over the front door and sprinkled brickwork throughout the rest of the facade do not seem consistent with the original style of the building. The proposed design for these 2 floors isn't just less appropriate, it is not appropriate. We feel it may be best for this section of the facade to be revised to include the original banding from the historic elevation. We would also urge a revision that includes the restoration of the fan lights over the front door and parlor floor window. According to the floor plan, there doesn't seem to be a clear reason why the original elevation can't be entirely restored with the front stoop and parlor floor window on the same level. We also think the existing dormer window and slate shingled roof should be restored, as these later alterations are a better fit with the McKim, Mead, and White design than are the proposed dormer and metal roof. After more than a century in variously altered states, it would be a great service to this easily overlooked and often forgotten McKim, Mead, and White design, a rarity on the Upper West Side, for its original facade to be restored, and this is the perfect opportunity to realize that vision for this special building. Thank you, Commissioners.
Okay, Thank you so much, John. Next up, we'll be hearing from Michelle Copeland. So Michelle, I will be promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you. Hello, Michelle, are you with us? Hello?
Did you hear me?
Hi, yes, we could hear you. I think there's a bit of an echo.
Should I start again?
Yes.
Well, I'm on a phone as well as the Zoom.
Okay, so I think if you could get off the phone and just stay on the Zoom, the echo.
Okay, fine. How's that?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, good. So my name is Michelle Copeland. My husband and I have lived on the Upper West Side in our brownstone on West 83rd Street for over 35 years, and we raised both of our children there. And we would like to add a voice in support of the backyards between West 82nd and 83rd Streets. The vibrancy and historic integrity of brownstones not only involve the appearance of the fronts of these structures, but also the rears, where each row house has a garden allowing for light, air, and foliage. While the building at 471 West End Avenue is unquestionably in need of repair and restoration, it also has a backyard that abuts those of the brownstones. Extending the footprint of the building to encroach on this open space would block the light and air and currents and irrevocably damage the space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Michelle. Okay. Next up, we will be hearing from Christine Jeannerette. So Christine, I will be promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you will have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we could hear you.
Okay, hold on one second. Great. So I'm here today just to voice opposition to the proposed breadth and scope of the renovation at 471. I sort of want to go back to what the historic district aimed to protect and preserve when it was formed. Paraphrasing from the designation report, this district contains a large collection of architecturally significant examples of residential building types, including townhouses, row houses, and flats, dating primarily from the 1880s to the 1930s.
Oh, I'm sorry. If you could please just state your name for the record. I'm terribly sorry.
Christine Jeannerette.
Thank you.
So 471, I think, is a prime example of exactly the kind of townhouse which this historic district was trying to preserve. As everyone's mentioned, it's the sole survivor from a group of 6 historic townhouses designed by McKim, Mead, and White. These townhouses were once described by Christopher Gray as a clump of exquisite little dwellings. The description exquisite little dwelling will certainly no longer apply to 471 if these plans are approved as is. The proposed plan includes a large build out of the rear and the addition of another story in order to house a spa. It includes a roof which will have a roof deck as well as multiple bulkheads for stairs, an elevator, and an unknown scope of mechanical equipment, as well as the addition of a skylight. We believe that within the confines of the statutory framework, height and bulk, to the extent it impacts the historic district, needs to be considered by landmarks. I'm also concerned that we don't even know the extent of the proposed enlargement given the plans we have seen, which state that the scope and locations of mechanical equipment is still to come. Even as currently proposed, this new supersized townhouse with glass skylights and extra bulk and height feels like it belongs in a suburban village and not in the Riverside West Historic District. I do think it will stick out like a sore thumb. While, as Sam White pointed out, skylights may be present on the Upper West Side, it is unprecedented for this historic district. Its approval will also create an unsavory precedent that undermines the basic intent of this historic district pursuant to its designation report. I also want to point out that while the front of 471 sits on West End Avenue, the back of the townhouse is adjacent to 4 townhomes on West 83rd Street, all of which surround a rear yard. I submitted 3 photographs to Landmarks yesterday in order to illustrate how out of proportion 471 would be in connection with these neighboring townhomes. The adjacent townhouses each have 3 stories and a basement, and none of them have roof decks, bulkheads, or HVAC systems on their roof, except for one which contains very limited equipment. 471 would be 2 stories taller than its townhouse and have a rooftop that is completely out of character with townhomes in this district. In addition, as people have discussed, they are talking about increasing the bulk of its rear extension, and it will have, as we saw, an extremely modern rear facade. Likewise, none of these will be in keeping with the neighboring townhomes. I think it's still unclear what will be visible from the avenue or side streets in terms of 471, as we don't know the scope of the rooftop additions, but it is clear that these additions will be visible to dozens and dozens of directly impacted neighbors, and that it will compromise light and air to a very large number of apartments which directly face 471. For all of these reasons, I'm opposed to the proposed reimagining of this historic townhouse. I respectfully request that Landmarks exact appropriate limitations to this development in order to preserve more of the character, height, and bulk of the original design of 471. Lastly, I'm requesting that the hearing is kept open for a further session, or at a minimum, the record is kept open by Landmarks. I believe any rendering of a judgment on this proposal must be informed, and currently, seeing as how we don't know anything about the rooftop additions, I don't think we have the full picture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. Okay. Next up, we will be hearing from Hannah Rothstein. So Hannah, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please state your name for the record and unmute your line, you will have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, my name is Hannah Rothstein. I live in 473 West End Avenue. After conferring with fellow residents in my building and in 465, I'm going to make very limited remarks because they are going to say what I would have said more articulately than I would. My main reason for speaking today is to let you know that in addition to the people who are speaking on behalf of our building and 465, that there are many residents of the building who feel as they do and are opposed to the proposed renovation mostly for the reasons that have already been stated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Hannah. Next up, we will be hearing from Brian Bittinger. So Brian, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. So if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you will have 3 minutes to speak.
All right, there we go. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Bittinger. I'm a resident of 465 West End Avenue. I'd like to say that I certainly share all the concerns that have been raised already today, but I have a different concern to add on to what's already been covered. The alteration description for the agenda today for this project refers to an altered Renaissance revival style row house built in 1865 to 1885 to 86, and an application to alter the facade and construct rooftop and rear yard additions. What is absent from that is any mention of excavation work or changes to the foundations of the building. In fact, at the CD7 meeting, the community board disapproved the rear facade because there was no discussion at that level of any excavation. If you look at page 42 of the proposed plans, however, it plainly shows that there would need to be excavation and changes to the existing foundation in order to create the proposed new rear cellar level room, which is labeled as a staff room in the plans, that extends beyond the existing rear facade to the location of the newly proposed rear facade. Also on pages 27, 28, and 29 of the plans, The proposed altered structure actually sits deeper in the ground than the original structure, which indicates that there would be substantial excavation and an entirely new foundation for the building. So I've spoken with many of the residents in my building and at 473 West End Avenue. Those are both 100-year plus old buildings that are adjacent to 471 West End Avenue. And we have concerns that there appears to have been no site condition survey performed, no disclosure of underpinning plans, no structural conditions report. And to the extent that there is a plan to conduct excavation, I'll note at the CB7 meeting, Preservation Committee members were under the complete misimpression that there wouldn't be any excavation. That was later clarified during that meeting. It became clear that there actually is apparently an intent to conduct excavation. So to the extent there is such a plan, and given that there's been no prior notice or discussion of that or assessment on the impact of the surrounding buildings, we would either ask for a guarantee, I guess, that no excavation would occur, or submission of appropriate plans that the adjacent buildings and this commission can review before any certificate of appropriateness would be authorized. And I'd just add that this is, one of multiple aspects of this project that has lacked in details from the beginning. And if it's approved without those details, we're concerned that there's not going to be proper oversight of the project to ensure that it remains within boundaries that don't negatively impact the surrounding historic buildings. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Brian. Okay, we will now be hearing from Ian Goldman. So Ian, I am promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the public record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ian Goldman. I'm a resident of 465 West End. Title 63, Section 215, paragraph F6 says, and I quote, "The depth and height of the proposed addition is not deeper than the predominant depth of taller than the predominant height of additions or Ls on buildings of a similar type." There are no diagrams or photos showing that comparison, as most of us know that this plan would defy that comparison should it be shown. The same paragraph continues to say, quote, "In no event shall the proposed addition rise to the full height of the rear facade," end quote. This plan shows an extension that extends a complete floor above the current facade and in effect removes the complete character of an extension by blending it into the body of the building. Paragraph F1 of the same section specifies that the addition will not be visible from a public thoroughfare. In this rendition of the plan, they did add sightline drawings for 82nd and 83rd Streets. However, the sightline from the 82nd Street side is inaccurate, and you can see from my submitted written testimony a visual to confirm that. Paragraph 6 of 215 goes on to say that the rear extension will not be approved if a rooftop addition exists and vice versa. I believe the applicant's presentation shows an existing rooftop addition. The intent clearly wishes to keep the basic characteristics of the building intact. This plan does not do that. It subverts the concept of the rear extension. It has enormous bulkheads, like you might find on high-rise dwellings. It'll have deleterious impact on the historic qualities of this district. In effect, this plan turns a classic brownstone with a rear L into a mid-rise apartment building, as is evidenced by the removal of the characteristics of the typical row house in this historic district. The precedent set by approving this rear piece would eviscerate the character of the historic district. It's clear that CB7 saw this by voting overwhelmingly to disapprove the appropriateness of the rear addition. The comments of the board members indicating that the rear yard extension was simply too large. Because the rear extension is in violation of 215, paragraph F6, and due to that violation, neighboring apartments would be adversely affected, I would ask the commission deny the appropriateness of the rear yard extension. Due to the incorrect sightline drawings, lack of comparative rear extension imagery, the voting advice of CB7, and the sentiment of the entire community, I would urge the committee to deny the appropriateness of the plans, or at the very least, to please keep the meeting open for another session. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you so much for that, Ian. We will now be hearing from Michelle Larand. So Michelle, I will be promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the public record, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we could hear you.
Hi, my name is Michelle Larand. I am a resident of 473 West End Avenue. I'm going to echo a lot of what we've already heard and add a few other items. The rules of the City of New York and the administrative code under which LPC operates place great importance on the impact upon neighboring properties and the issues of certificates of appropriateness. To date, no one has collected that information from the neighborhood. Today, only for the first time is LPC hearing from people in the neighborhood of 471 West End Avenue. We are cognizant of the fact that this row house is currently in need of restoration and repair, but there are many deleterious effects on this proposed renovation. Remember, 471 West End Avenue is one of the last remaining examples, as you've heard, of the 1880s Kim, Mead, and White townhouse. It's a row house that should be retained and protected as set forth in the designation report of the West Side. Today, you will hear and should pay attention to, in accordance with the rules under which you operate, the legitimate concerns of the neighbors of 471 regarding the historical appropriateness of the facade renewal, the size and height of the proposed rooftop addition, being fueled by the inclusion of a large amenity space, specifically a spa for a single family. The addition of a bulkhead to the rooftop, which was not very well described in the architect's presentation, which will add on to the already large bulk of the roof. The impact of a significant proposed excavation, which was not well detailed to date yet, and the impact of that excavation on the architectural and structural features on the neighboring buildings of 465 and 473. The proposed immense and overwhelming addition to the back of 471, which is slated to be the full width of the building, go back 20 feet and rise to the full height of the proposed new rooftop. This inappropriately sized addition will, as other people have said, adversely affect the other houses along 82nd and 83rd Street who face into the shared back donut. Not to mention the many dozens of people in 465 and 473 who will be adversely affected by this addition. We urge landmarks to also consider the precedent they would be setting should they approve the proposal as stated. Again, the designation report states that landmarks preservation will retain examples of 1880s row house streetscape, and these massive additions to this landmarked row house building are allowed. It would make it unrecognizable in any way, shape, or form to the original. What does that mean? Does it mean that other row houses, brownstones, and similar properties can now rise 6 to 7 stories or more, add massive additions not historically in keeping? What does that mean for a landmark neighborhood? Does landmark then have any meaning at all? Landmarks is supposed to protect neighborhoods from historically inappropriate renovation and overdevelopment and not support it without consideration. To approve this would set a precedent that undermines the basic intent as set out in the designation report. On behalf of the neighboring West End Avenue buildings to 471, all of which are landmarked and as such should also enjoy landmark protections, We would like to go on record that the proposal as it stands is not in keeping with the neighborhood, not in keeping with our landmarks designation, and simply not acceptable. It is our understanding that the applicant has.
Michelle, could you please sum up your statement, please? You're over time.
Certainly. I will just say that we would kindly ask you to please keep this discussion open and not to issue a certificate of approval at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Michelle. Okay. And next up, we'll be hearing from Sandra Mansfield. So Sandra, I will be promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the public record, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of 90 apartments from 465 and 473 West End Avenue. These buildings are adjacent to 471 and in many places touch. We recognize the need to repair and restore this current neighborhood eyesore. However, we implore LPC to recognize that there are many omissions, unknowns, and deleterious effects of this proposal. We've been here today to point out some of these and hope that LPC can put off voting for just a short while to address them. One basic missing element is how the proposed 471 building aligns with accuracy and measurements and all roof elements included against the adjacent and also historic buildings. I reached out to the architect, received an incorrect drawing. He attempted to fix it, but is still incorrect even in this presentation. Please look at pages 51 to 54 carefully, as our building starts below ground and they've aligned the base of 471 with the base of our building, or just not correctly. So as a result, in some of the side pictures, you see 471 sitting lower than it actually should. Okay, next topic. LPC has a defined set of recommendations published in the row house manual on how to restore and preserve row houses. The proposed plans today deviate from Landmark's own recommendations. I've summarized some points on the roof, facade, cornice, and brick in something that I submitted along with photos, but I'm just going to talk about the roof here today. Page 29 of the row house manual. If a roof is architecturally significant, it is also important to preserve. I'd like to say that the slate mansard roof is architecturally significant, as West End Preservation explained to us before, and worth preserving. Note that the manual does not mention that a roof needs to be original to be architecturally significant. Also on page 29, the row house manual, the main function of a roof, however, is to keep water from entering the building and to direct this water away from the building's exterior walls. If you look on page 31 of the presentation here today, you'll see a 3D image of a roof deck and roof, and you'll see that the roof deck is shown and that interrupts the roof, and it actually is closed on 4 sides. It's hard to see that because the adjacent buildings are omitted from the image, so you might miss that. So basically, the roof deck pocket will sit there and collect water, and we know that drains fail. And with that, if you look at the building, there are no barriers shown to protect the neighboring landmark buildings. It's just shown as open. So that is something that's missing from the plans. This image also shows that the raised roof has a railing added, and the railing, the missing protective sides of the roof deck, and also all the other roof elements have not been evaluated for line of sight from the street. And if you go back and listen to the architect's description, you'll see he was very carefully around the words today when he talked about the line of sight evaluation and the mock-up. The big picture, when you look at this rooftop, although it's pictured on a row house, it looks as though it belongs to the top of the building.
Sandra, I'm terribly sorry. You're over time. If you could please sum up your statement, please.
Sure. I just, given the concerns of the letter and given all the concerns raised in this letter, I request that the hearing be kept open. And I'd also like to offer something, because I am sitting right next to the site and I can give you guys an exact view of the back area. I can't quite figure out how to do that. So I don't see myself in the video, but if I'll offer that to you as a committee as in 5 seconds, I can show you the backyard and the other buildings and the courtyard and the other townhouses that are right nearby, which might be helpful. I mean, seeing is helpful to understand. So feel free to take me up on that.
Okay, and I do think we have to move along. We'll all pass the 3 minutes, but we understand the concerns and we'll look at it carefully and as we move forward.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sandra. So we will now be hearing from Mark Diller from CB7. So Mark, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the public record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
We heard him.
Did he?
He already spoke.
Oh, he raised his hand to speak for this application as well.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Sorry, Zoom is taking its sweet time today to promote folks, so I wasn't playing possum. So I am Mark Diller. I am speaking on behalf of Community Board 7 with thanks to the co-chairs of our Preservation Committee, Michelle Parker and Kay Carpin, for giving me this opportunity to speak with you today. If ever a building was an orphan, clearly this one was. And while we have significant issues, many of which have already been previewed for you by the community's testimony, we don't want to lose sight of the sigh of relief that eventually something of a rescue for this orphan is in the offing, and we're grateful for that. This is an application which was turned around for us at our full board from the recommendation of, or partially, the recommendation from the Preservation Committee. As you heard, we have voted as a board to disapprove the rear yard addition and expansion by a vote of 27-5 to 3-0. The board did see fit to recommend approval with respect to the front facade and the rooftop addition. So I'd like to focus in on the rear yard addition and the concerns that were there. First and foremost, we're grateful for the community for bringing some things to our attention, which despite some really serious study in advance of and during the meeting, it just eluded us, and that is the excavation. It was not called to our attention by the applicant. And at the end of the day, we are, as a board, aware of the heightened protections that apply when you excavate in an historic district or next to an individual landmark. That said, we are as concerned about the omission of that obvious and significant excavation in this project as we are about the excavation itself. The excavation, though, isn't the only reason why the board turned around the rear yard. It is our typical approach to rear yard additions on townhouses in an historic district to want to keep some plane of the original that would be coplanar with the townhouses to the left and right or within the donut. As you saw in the presentation here today, the only images that you saw of the donut were of the two large apartment buildings on that flank this building. There were no images of the townhouses on the side streets that come right up to those to the alleyway or mews behind those apartment buildings. And so the concept of a donut here was lost in the presentation. When you factor that in, this townhouse is indeed a piece of a larger donut and ought to be treated the way that any other townhouse would be treated in that respect. In that context, the full height, full width addition that goes up another full floor is inappropriate to the character of the donuts, especially ones that are as largely intact as the donut behind this building is. And so for that reason, in addition to the bulk and height of the bulk and height of this rear yard addition, the use of a skylight in the rear as opposed to the skylight in the front, which echoes a previous original condition, not exactly, but it echoes it. And and the monolithic character of that
Mark, I'm
rear yard
sorry.
addition.
Mark, I'm
Am I
sorry,
there?
you're
I am
above.
sorry. There used to be a timer. I could see it when I was counting down. For those reasons, we ask you to disapprove this application, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Mark. Okay, and next up, we will be hearing from David Hughes. So David, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we could hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Greg, and thank you to the commission for hearing mine and my neighbors' concerns here. My name is David Hughes. I'm a resident at 473 West End Avenue on the 6th floor. My apartment actually does currently touch the top of the roof of the existing structure. I wanted to mostly talk about omissions from the plan today, which have now been largely addressed by at least 4 other speakers. So I'll keep that a little more in summary. The first, the omission, of course, of the HVAC unit and mechanicals, which the proposal just shows as scope and locations to come. I believe that roof was only 23 feet wide to begin with. And a unit needed to run a building like that will create significant noise and vibration. And in my unprofessional opinion, I don't see where there's anywhere to put it where it wouldn't be a real nuisance. It would literally be touching my 6-year-old daughter's room. The equipment wouldn't literally touch the wall, but we can't, there's no way to know really the extent that that's going to impact us. I do also want to go on the record saying that I think that the mansard slate roof should be maintained. I think the original proposal had it that way. And I'll quote Christopher Gray, as several other people have, where he writes, "The Mansardbania, 1868 to 1873, swept over New York with a particular incandescence, but went out like a guttering candle. Traces of the mansard bubble somehow survived. 471 is one of the few that did. If you look at some of the other buildings that do have them, the Grand Hotel, 31st Street and Broadway, 171 West 71st Street, beautiful, beautiful buildings. And I think really with how limited there are still around, it's important to keep. Second was the omission, which has been brought up twice now, about the excavation details. So the drawings, they just show an excavated area, which then is a staff room magically. It can't be overstated, the concern of doing excavation next to 2 century-old buildings. And this is the fact that this hasn't been discussed or brought up. I really believe that this hearing, the record needs to be left open to a later date. And I know the issue of the rear extension's also been brought up, but I wanted to touch on it also because of the disastrous impact this would have on my family and 90 other families that live near us who've lived there for decades and decades of unobstructed enjoyment. The proposed addition in the back would completely block all light and vision out of my daughter's bedroom. It would be the only thing we would see from our kitchen. It would really harm our quality of life. And I know this isn't the concern of the commission, but it would devastate the value of our apartment because we'd be blocked in. So we're concerned about the preservation.
David, if you could
Yes.
please sum up your statement. I'm sorry, you're over time.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to the commission again. I wanted to reference Title 63, Section 221, which does refer to the placement of the HVAC unit. But because of everything everyone's mentioned, I just request that the record be left open to a future date. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, David. And next up, we'll be hearing from Carol Joseph. So Carol, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. So if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Hello, Carol, are you with us?
Hi, sorry. My name is Carol Joseph, and I'm a resident at 473. I will not belabor what everybody has said, with which I agree, and I think that needs to be taken quite seriously in terms of preserving this building. The only thing I would like to emphasize with respect to the rear addition, the character of all of the glass going from top to bottom is way outside of any kind of preservation of what was there before. And with respect to the roof on the front side, I also agree that the slate roof should be maintained, but in addition, above that slate roof, while it's contended that you cannot see it, the addition has also a complete wall of glass, which is out of character with the neighborhood and with preservation of this particular townhouse. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, Carol. Okay. It doesn't seem as though we have any other hands raised. So I will, oh, we actually do. So we will be hearing from Maxine. Maxine, I'll be promoting you to panelist right now. So if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You will have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, everybody. I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to all of us speak about how important this block is and this project is to all of us. When we bought in this building probably about 8 years ago, we are the apartment that's actually right up against where right now is the bulkhead. And we bought there knowing that there was stuff there, and we closed our windows. We actually bricked up our windows knowing that they wouldn't be able to really build higher than where they were. So we bricked up our living room and our den both, knowing that. And we bought on this block particularly because we thought that we were safe here and they would never build a building, 6, 7 floors high, which to me is just, I can't believe we're in this situation now and that other people will possibly be forced to block up their windows. So I don't want to repeat anything or belabor it, but I do want to say that I do hope that you'll all take this very seriously, because there really is not a lot of transparency going on, and that's very scary. We're raising our children here, and the lack of transparency between these plans and what's being turned in and what is actually happening is a little bit scary to me on many levels, on being able to demolish below ground, as well as everything else that's talked about. I don't want to repeat it, but again, I just wanted to bring up that we boarded our windows knowing that nobody would be able to ever go much higher than where they were, and now to bring in this huge building is just for one family, really, one family. That's what's going to be living there, to mess the whole entire block. I don't want to say mess, but to make a big mess is really what it is, because you're blocking light. There's gardens in the back, the brickwork. It should be a beautiful building, and we're happy that they're going to be able to make it better than it is now, of course. But what they're trying to do is just distasteful, really. So thank you for hearing me, and thank you for taking the time to listen to all of us.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, and I'm looking through who has their hands raised. It doesn't appear as we have any other hands raised. So I'll just note we also received 2 other letters from other residents who recommend disapproval. That is all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to thank everyone who came today and spoke and expressed your concerns. And we will listen to all of those and consider those concerns very carefully. I do want to just note, however, that With respect to the references to Title 63 and the rules of the City of New York, which are the rules that the Landmarks Preservation Commission uses to authorize staff level administrative approvals. So those rules are not, what those rules are is really an administrative tool that allows for an administrative staff level approval. And if you follow the criteria, you will always get an approval from the commission at staff level. So by definition, anything that comes to our public hearings every single Tuesday doesn't meet the rules. And so not meeting the rules isn't necessarily a determination of appropriateness. That's what we do around this table. We evaluate things like height, scale, materials, massing, the context to determine whether work is appropriate or not. We do not, however, consider views, light, and air. So those are outside of our purview. But we will certainly think about all of your comments very carefully. And again, thank you for sharing those concerns with us. I want to turn to the applicant now and ask if you would like to respond to the comments. We've heard comments on both the restoration work, the excavation work, where I think there's some concerns you can speak to, and then the rear and rooftop additions in the context of this block. It is true that in where there are remnant row houses between large apartment buildings that have been built on either side, we have approved full height rear yard additions that connect to rooftop additions in that context. But we've heard about other row houses nearby, and I think it would be helpful if you would address the larger context so we can understand it fully.
Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, it's nice to be surrounded by friends. And a number of points were brought up, and I am not going to take more of your time than I have to respond to them, but there are about a dozen issues that I think came up. First up, some people were talking about windows being blocked, and I think one person referred to his daughter's bedroom losing her light. Those are lot line windows, and I would suggest that his daughter might do better in a window that had a room that had legal light and air rather than a window that only was on a lot line. So we are going to be blocking some lot line windows. We're affecting lot line windows, but those are lot line windows. Secondly, the people who talk about the bulk of the rear addition, yes, this is 23 feet wide. It's flanked on either side by two buildings that are 100 feet wide and 16 stories tall. And so I find it really remarkable that people are getting so upset about a 6-story addition that's 23 feet wide when they're sandwiched between two buildings that have completely unrelieved elevations on the rear, completely visible from the backyards that are 16 stories tall. I mean, you can draw your own conclusion, but they seem to be putting a lot of attention on the smallest guy in the block. This is a completely as of right application with respect to zoning. With respect to excavation, by extending the building 20 feet in the rear and extending a basement space and a cellar space underneath that, yes, we are excavating. No one ever claimed that we were not excavating. If anyone thinks that you can do that without excavating, we'd like to meet them. But I would have to show you the details of the site. Our backyard is about 6 or 7 feet higher than the backyards on either side of it. And the buildings on either side of it are set back somewhere between 10 and 15 feet from our backyard. So we are going to be excavating for our cellar without touching or having any impact whatsoever on the buildings next door. It's a complete sort of false alarm in terms of the excavation. We are going to be lowering our cellar by 18 inches down to the bottom of the footing, but we are not underpinning the building or changing any of the footings. Obviously, yes, there are going to be monitors that are installed in accordance with regulations of the City of New York. So I would just dismiss this excavation conversation. Rooftop equipment, we have now sized our rooftop equipment, and it is shown on the sections. It is out of the sight lines. We have sent the neighbors a letter saying that we are committed to complying with the New York City Code regarding the noise limits of rooftop equipment. That's the law. We have to comply with it, and that equipment will not exceed the noise limits of the building code. Remembering people talk about the gross increase in height of this building, I just want to recall that it is increasing 6 feet 5 inches for the main roof, and then it has 2 bulkheads on top, one for the elevator overrun and one for access to the roof. In terms of the impact on the donut, I refer you to the Sanborn map. Our property, all 100 feet of it, does not extend past the buildings or the 2 apartment buildings on either side. So to the extent that they impact on the donut with their buildings, we would be impacting on the donut with 30 feet of rear yard, not so much with 20 feet of extension. Then I would say, obviously, no one likes to lose their view. And so we've heard these objections before. Join the club. We all live in New York and we all lose our view. I had a lovely view of the Empire State Building for 10 years in my apartment until I lost it. And lastly, in terms of the relationship of our proposed design to McKim, Mead and White, I did go through the McKim, Mead and White monographs to see some of the elements in their early townhouses that show up and which I have sort of borrowed by reference but not quoted. I will plead guilty to not being McKim, Mead and White. This is a design from Platt, Beyer, Devell, White, and we stand by it. Thank you very much.
Oops, excuse me. Thank you very much. All right, commissioners, do we have any other questions? All right, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm sending you all requests to unmute so that we can close the hearing and move to our discussion, and we'll see where we are at the end of the discussion. Commissioner Gustafson, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Shamir Baron, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is closed and we'll now begin our discussion. And of course, this includes work on the front facade, the roof, and the rear facade, and some excavation. And let's see, Commissioner Goldblum, would you like to start this one?
You betcha. Okay, so very nice to end the day with a totally consensual, no conflict kind of application like this that everyone loves. It's an interesting, and it brings up a lot of interesting issues that we deal with all the time. Maybe the public doesn't have access to that all the time, but it's great to have them here and to hear their very, very important comments. I think that let's start with the front facade, since that's what we're looking at. I think that what's remarkable about the McKim, Mead and White building that has been in some ways effaced is the planarity of it. If you look at that original image of the complex, it is flat, 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 and that's celebrated with the textures, with the striping, and this because of the presence of that tenacious stucco coating will no longer have that quality. So the planarity of the facade that we see on the left will not be retainable or attainable. However, what I notice on the image on the left is the near symmetry of the building, where even though the arch for the door is off a little bit, it's a little bit off to the left. It's kind of, there's a near symmetry to the building that its later iterations retained. Despite all the changes, there was a axial symmetry to the facade that is being aggressively fought at the new design at the lower floor, the parlor floor. And I think that that's a mistake. I think the applicant need not follow the original, need not replicate the arches or the striping, but the applicant should consider that in the nature of this important design is axial symmetry or close to axial symmetry. and that the rather intense variations between the door bay on the left and the double window bay on the right, I think is too aggressive, and needs, there should be some recognition of the symmetry of the building as it has been pretty much since it was designed. Furthermore, because the plane of the new brick is going to be proud of the old brick, I personally think that there is less need to necessarily copy the brick. I think it's okay to copy the brick, and they clearly like to do so. But if they do so, I think that the coping at the windowsill line of the second floor should be studied carefully and need not replicate the original to the extent that it can be discerned, but should be emphatic enough so that it doesn't look like it's a mistake, so that it's very clear demarcation between the old plane and the new plane. And I do think that the diaper pattern dots are kind of coming from a different vocabulary. And it's not a modern vocabulary at all. It's a kind of Victorian vocabulary. And I don't think it's appropriate to this particular style building. I think there are other ways to increase the interest of that base that would not involve a pattern that I think has very strong associations that are coming a little bit out of left field. In terms of the cornice, I think it's, this is a tough one because we can't make them put it back, much as I would like to. I think that the absence of that amazing, beautiful terracotta cornice is a sin of the highest order. I can't make them put it back, but I wish I could. And I think it would be to kind of celebrate it in this way with this beam flying across and the window going below it. For me, that just feels wrong. I really feel like the cornice should be restored, and the studio window should be behind it and not cutting into it. And furthermore, I think that one of the pieces of testimony that rang most truly for me was the dating of the slate roof. I think the fact that the slate roof goes back that far and has been a presence on West End Avenue for that long makes me feel like we should keep slate there. I think that the copper would attract attention to itself. I think that the applicant's statement that it would be more recessive, I think is incorrect. And further, I would make the skylight, the sawtooth, flush with or recessed into the slate. It seems like it's purposefully proud to kind of give it a kind of a modern edge. I think it, again, calls too much attention to itself, and we wouldn't want to. I don't think that's appropriate. I think that the top floor addition is okay. It reminds me of, we did, I think, a very tall addition of a similar building on Park Avenue a few years ago with a kind of really steep, steeply raked back thing, and we approved that. I do have difficulty with the backyard additions, though. I think that clearly there's no row here. There's no issue of maintaining continuity of a group of houses, unfortunately. But I think what's lost in the wholesale extension of the rear yard is the sense of the volume of the McKimbey and White building. And that's a standard that we look at often, even in the case where there is no row. And I think that here, especially with a building of this value architecturally, it would be wrong to obscure the entirety of the volume of the building. So I think that the third floor, which is the top floor of the McKimbey and White original, should be retained in its plane and in its fenestration to the extent that that makes sense. I think that the use of a rain screen panel material at the back is inappropriate. I think that it's okay to have a designed facade back there. But I think that the use of such a front-oriented material just feels inappropriate to rear yards, which are more casual and more informal. I mean, that donut, such as it is, it's very varied with both in height and in color, but it's all brick. And so I would encourage the applicant to look at brick for that rear facade.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. I think we don't have Commissioner Devonshire, so we'll move to Commissioner Chen.
I agree with some of the comments of Commissioner Goldblum. Starting with the front facade, I think that the symmetry in the original design is symmetrical, and so his comments are valid. I would defer to the rest of the commissioner on the question of slate versus copper. But his comment about backyard, I will defer to the rest of the commissioners to see what the majority feels, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Jefferson?
Commissioner Goldblum covered all aspects that I was concerned about, because I agree with his comments.
Okay. Commissioner Gustafson?
Yeah, I think Commissioner Goldblum covered the waterfront. Nothing to add.
Okay. Commissioner Shamir Baran?
Thanks. I feel very strongly that the front facade should recall the original two-arched opening, even if that means that they have to extend the height of the front door, but that the relationship that brings up with the original brick detailing, which I think is a really important feature of this building, obviously, and the opportunity to be able to recreate it in these arched openings and banding is really one that should not be missed. So I think that they absolutely should return to that. Feel very strongly that the slate roof should be retained. It's so special and unusual to see that much of it on this kind of an avenue street, and it's old enough and distinguished enough that it should be retained. I agree that it would be wonderful if the cornice can be preserved and conserved and restored, and that if at all possible, we should encourage them to do that. With respect to the rear, what's interesting to me, and I cannot figure this out, is the 1955 Sanborn, and how deep it's. And again, if somebody spoke about this, then please remind me. But it seems that the depth of the building is deeper than the current depth, and yet not quite as deep as what's being proposed here. And I would propose that maybe they, stick with that 1955 dimension. And I am sort of on the fence about Commissioner Goldblum's notion about the top floor of the rear and whether or not the existing buildings windows and face be preserved at that level. I'd love to hear other thoughts on that, but that's where I'm a little bit sort of open to thinking of other things.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chapin?
Sorry, I was unmuting. I agree with Michael Goldblum's comments to a large degree on the front. And I also felt that the dots really don't work, that there should be other ways, including going back to the original, banding as a way to distinguish the lower floor should be looked at. Though something else would be possible, because, you're looking at something which is going back to the 1910 and 1915 versions in some ways and making changes, which we do allow. So there could be some flexibility there, but I definitely don't think the dots work as a solution. And I think Michael's point about the asymmetry was a good one. I also agree that I think the slate should be used on the roof. I don't think they should change it to copper. And I agree with the remark about the cornice, because either the cornice should run across and whatever's at the top there, window should be behind it, or preserve the current, addition with the sort of appearance of a dormer in the middle of the mansard, which is a very characteristic thing that's been there for a very long time. So I guess those are my remarks on the front. I mean, one of the things that could be tried also is using some more of the arched windows below to work with creating a different sense in the lower part, but that doesn't have to occur. Anyway, on the back, on the additions to the top and the back, I really feel that the changes to the additions have created a different sense of the entire building, because the addition to depth and length are really changing your sense of the volume of this building. Now, you know, we often permit things that are a little more, you know, extravagant, so to speak, and in between very large buildings. But I think that just too much is happening here. You're losing the roof line. You're losing the back is totally being lost. So I think there could be a full width addition, maybe up to the top of the current L, and not have that shed at the bottom, but just have a clean line. But I don't think it should go back to this extent and up to this extent. And I think that the rooftop addition should not be as large as it is also. So those are my comments.
Okay. All right. Thank you, commissioners, for your thoughtful comments. So where we are today is we will not take an action. We've heard a number of comments for all sides of the proposal. I think at the front facade, we'll ask the applicant to study the symmetry of the building and, you know, explore the idea of arches, but really predominantly focusing on that symmetry and thinking about how the top resolves and how that window can be set back. And then thinking about the details that go along with those revisions. And then I think we've heard from everybody that the slate is the preferred material for the rooftop addition, and that the copper wouldn't be appropriate given the length of time slate has been here. And then I think we've heard from many, although not all, that there should be some reduction in the rooftop and or rear yard additions and how they connect to each other to retain a sense of the original volume. And so I think that we will leave it up to the applicant to think about those comments and how to respond, and we'll take no action. We will have the applicant back when they're ready and they can present some revisions. And at that time, we'll welcome additional written comments from the neighbors and public. All right, so we'll continue this discussion in the future, and we'll now move to the next item.
Okay, the next item is public hearing item number 6, LPC 23-00197, an application for a certificate of appropriateness, number of Manhattan, block 1232, lot 61, 514 West End Avenue in the Riverside West End Historic District Extension 1. This is a Renaissance revival style apartment building designed by Gaetan Aiello and built in 1923 to 24, and the application is to install through-wall HVAC louvers.
Hey, commissioners, the applicants have entered the hearing. Andrea, could you unmute yourself so I can give you the control of the presentation? Great. Now, if you just click on your screen. Perfect. Please state your name for the record and you may begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrea Guatacaldini. I'm here with Clayport Design and Architecture. We are presenting this project at 514 West End Avenue, and it's on the building is located on the southeast corner between West End Avenue and West 85th Street. And the apartment where the project is located is at the top floor. And here, oops. So slow, sorry about this. This we can see the building with the tax photo from the 1940s, 1980s, and the current facade. This is, of course, the major the primary facade on West End Avenue and the 85th Street. The apartment where the renovation is located is the top floor, and is portion is on 85th Street, and the rest of the apartment is on the back of the building and is highlighted in red here. The proposal is to add through wall unit. The main windows, it's the one on 85th Street. So to preserve the stone enframelment and still, as you can see this mock-up, we are proposing a grille next to it, so it's not centered to the windows. And for the rear facade, it's the facade is much simpler, and we are showing a mock-up here by the last windows on this facade next to, not centered to the windows, but next to it. Here you can see the elevation as the existing elevations, and these are enlargements. So the grille we are proposing is of a new HVAC unit that is not a traditional through walls, and this allowed us to have a much smaller and reduced grille. The grille we're proposing is about 2 feet in width by a foot in height, and this is just for the fresh air and exhaust of the unit. And this is the rear of the building where the second unit is proposed. And for both, as you can see at the top, for both the grills, we are proposing to match the existing brick color. So for the grill on 85th Street is going to be the brick to match, and for the rear, the sort of light beige brick to match for the grill. As the last two sheets, this is the existing floor plan, and this is the proposed where the units and the grill and the through wall unit are located. The other feature about this new HVAC units are that it's not the holes are very minimal that is going to be penetrating through the exterior facade. Is just 2 holes of about 8 inches in diameters with a square grill in front. And so we're trying to really minimize the intervention on the facade and the visibility of the grills. And I'm concluded.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have some questions. Commissioner Goldblum?
Okay, can you go back to that plan, please?
Yes.
Thanks. 2 questions. I guess it's a new thing with this type of unit, but is there a reason why you don't locate it under the windows in the old-fashioned way?
So the main reason for the one on 85th Street is to not have the through wall unit under on the stone enframelment and sill. So we're preserving that part. In regard to the rear facade of the building, so the one in the sort of dining, it's mostly to since the heating, the radiator is currently under the windows, is a 2-pipe system. It's more difficult to move, and also it's the efficiency about having a radiator by the windows. It's much higher, so that's why we're proposing to have the HVAC unit next to it. That's the matter.
Okay, great. And if we were to, I mean, put it this way, the normal thing that we do here is try to get you not to do anything on the front. So could you theoretically take, take the unit, here it is, take this unit and put it here, take this unit and put it here?
So we absolutely evaluate that option with our client, and so the main reason with difficulty to locate it by the sort of rear facade is due the room is particularly small, it's about 168 square feet. And the placing the HVAC unit by the smaller window by the bathroom will compromise the use of the room itself. And so that's why we reevaluate and we're proposing it by the left wall of the room.
And in terms of the unit that's in the smaller, like it looks like the kitchen of the breakfast room, could you locate that on what appears to be a less visible sidewall?
We potentially could. I think that area it's seen, but that elevation it's seen by West End Avenue. And let me, if I may, I'll show you.
Great.
That highlight. So that window is basically the small windows that you mentioned. And this is sort of West End Avenue view. I mean, the grill is very small and the site is from far away. So it would work too. The only other idea, and is all internal about the internal design of it, is having both radiator and AC unit on this will allow us to do a very clean and uniform radiator cover that will cover both the radiator and the unit. So that's why we, in terms of interior design, we prefer that facade, but we could put it on that other wall if is required.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? All right, I don't see any other questions at this time, so let's move to public testimony. If you're in the meeting and would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand so we can identify you, and I'll turn it over to Gregory to take us through the testimony.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We received a few signups beforehand, so we'll be going through those first. The first of which is Megan Fitzpatrick. So Megan from Landmarks West, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. So if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. Megan Fitzpatrick for Landmark West. The Landmark West Certificate of Appropriateness Committee believes this application for an additional grille does not substantially change one's reading of the facade. However, we urge the applicant and the Commission to err on the side of caution when considering any future through-wall AC grilles. As it stands, the placement of previous grilles on the north and west elevations can be described as erratic and inconsistent at best. This latest installation begins a new line of grille placement on the north elevation. The question must be posed at what point does the continuation of these puncture wounds fundamentally change the appearance of the landmark? We urge the applicant to find alternatives for future ventilation needs and suggest a master plan be put in place to standardize these AC grilles. The Landmark West Certificate of Appropriateness Committee cautiously recommends approval of this application with careful consideration for future installation of AC grilles. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan. Next up, we'll be hearing from Josette Amato from West End Preservation Society. So Josette, I am promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please state your name for the record and unmute your line, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon again. I'm Josette Amato, West End Preservation Society. We understand that the applicant has tried to minimize attention to this item with their choice of the vent and their limited options of placement. They will be located at the top floor of the building. The existing balustrade and the wonderful arched window should draw one's eye away from the vents, and it should be minimally visible from street view. Several through-wall air conditioners already exist throughout this building, and this would be preferable to additional in-window units. We do not like to see any facade cut through if avoidable. However, for the above reasons, we can find this reasonably appropriate to the district and will pose no objection to its construction. Thank you for listening to our comments.
Okay, thank you so much, Josette. Next up, we will be hearing from Lucy Levine from Historic Districts Council. So Lucy, I am promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please state your name for the record and unmute your line, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, Commissioners. This is Lucy Levine speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. HDC appreciates that this proposal is for an extremely high floor and visibility would be extremely limited. But we feel the proposed placement of the HVAC units sets an inappropriate precedent that might be followed on lower, more visible floors. We feel the appropriate solution is to locate the through-the-wall units on secondary and tertiary facades and to center them under windows. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Lucy. Next up, we'll be hearing from John Graham from VSNY. So John, I am promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. John Graham for the Victorian Society in New York. The applicant's proposal for a new louver for an HVAC unit shows installation through historic brickwork on the primary facade of 514 West End Avenue. The room this louver would service is on a corner with its other exterior wall on the secondary side facade. This louver could just as easily be installed at the side facade as is proposed for another room in the same 16th floor apartment. We recommend that new louvers be approved only for non-primary facades to retain the original appearance of this handsome 1924 building designed by Gaetan Ayala. Continuing to install louvers in a random pattern without a master plan would be especially detrimental. Thank you, Commissioners.
Okay, thank you so much, John. And next we will be hearing from Mark Diller from CB7. So Mark, I'm promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you. There we go.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mark Diller speaking on behalf of Community Board 7 with the direction of my co-chairs, Kay Carpin and Michelle Parker. We shared the concerns about invading the primary facade. We were, of course, in full agreement that the decorative stonework on the primary facade should remain intact, and therefore another alternative solution was needed to be found. The applicant was very generous with time and helped us to explore all of the other options that you've heard here today, and we were satisfied that that this is the appropriate placement for these louvers. One thing that hasn't been highlighted that we took into account was that there is a modest but still legible decorative element, almost like a teeny mini cornice, just below where this louver would be located on the primary facade, so that the net effect from the ground looking up is that one's eye would be drawn to both the stone surround for the window and that horizontal element, and therefore taken away from this interruption of all of that. I agree that this shouldn't be a precedent and that these things should be taken one at a time. I wholeheartedly agree on the concept of a master plan, but we didn't want to hold up this applicant for that time-consuming enterprise. So on balance, Community Board 7 recommends approval. I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Mark. And from what I am seeing, those are all the hands that we have raised. So I will bring it back to you, Chair Carroll. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to turn back to the applicant and ask if you would like to respond to the comments that we've heard, in particular on this front facade and it's sort of addressing moving it to the side facade and what that would actually mean in terms of usability. I know you did answer that already, but if you could walk through that again, that would be helpful.
Yes, definitely. I would say compared to other lower floor grills that currently are, our main focus was on finding a unit that has the smallest grill available. And I think we truly believe that this is the smallest possible, 2 feet by 1 feet in dimensions. And after that, we sort of evaluate which other location for the unit was possible. Although considering the limited size of the room, and with the limited size of the room and the usability with the interior layout of this apartment, we established that the proposed location is the best to also not make the room sort of dysfunctional in the use for our client.
Okay. All right, commissioners, do we have any final questions? All right, we're gonna close the hearing and move to our discussion. Okay. Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so this is an application for these 2 louvers, through the wall louvers installed adjacent to windows for a variety of reasons. And we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Holford Smith, would you start this one?
Sure. I think these units seem like a promising product for this application with very small louver. However, I do think that having the grille on the primary facade is not appropriate if we can avoid it. So I know it's not as ideal for the interior layout, but I would require that they, or request that they move the unit in the corner bedroom to the side facade, in the same facade as the one in the dining area.
Got it. Thank you. All right, Commissioner Chapin.
Yeah, I agree completely with Commissioner Holford Smith. It's good that they have found a small unit, which perhaps can be used at other times, but I also agree that it should not be these should not be on the primary facade. We want to avoid that wherever possible.
Okay. Commissioner Goldblum,
Agreed.
Commissioner Chen,
Same here.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Agree.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Yeah, I just want to point out that, this is a one-off situation at the moment. Highlighting what some of the testimony said, this is very, very high up there and very, very difficult to see. However, the next applicant will be the next floor down and the next floor down and the next floor down. And pretty soon it's going to be, we're going to have to judge how far is too far, how close is too close. In any event, on this particular application, it does stand alone. And so I find it appropriate as others with moving that louver in the bedroom to the other wall. But each one of these should be judged one at a time unless we get that master plan.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Commissioner Shamir Baron.
I'm in agreement with everyone's statements and think it should be on the secondary facade.
Okay. All right, so I think we can move to approve this with the modification that the one on the primary facade be moved to the side facade in the corner front bedroom. Commissioner Holford Smith, would you make that motion?
Yes. In the matter of LPC 23-00197, 514 West End Avenue, Riverside West End Historic District Extension 1, a Renaissance Revival style apartment building designed by Gaetan Aiello and built in 1923-24. Application is to install through-wall HVAC louvers. I note that the building's style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Riverside West End Historic District Extension 1 Historic District. I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the proposed louvers will be installed at plain brick and will be mounted flush with and finished to match the surrounding masonry. that the secondary facade features an irregular pattern of masonry openings. Therefore, the location of the proposed louver to the side of the window will not draw undue attention to the installation, and that the work of the secondary facade will not damage, conceal, or detract from any significant architectural features of the building. However, I find that the proposed louver at the primary facade is in a corner room, which also has a window on the secondary facade, and that this louver, as proposed, will detract from significant architectural features at the top floor and create precedent for an irregular pattern of louver installations at this primary facade. Therefore, I recommend that the proposed louver at the primary facade be relocated to the secondary facade adjacent to or under another window in this room.
Thank you. And Commissioner Gustafson, would you second that motion?
Second.
Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
With 8 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes.
So that's approved. With that modification, please continue to work with the staff, and we'll now move to our next and final item for today.
All right, and that is public hearing item number 7, LPC 23-04180. Application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, block 1384, lot 23, 829 Madison Avenue in the Upper East Side Historic District. This is an altered Queen Anne style residence designed by Black & Company and built in 1885 to 86. The application is to alter the facade, install storefront infill, and replace roofing.
Okay, commissioners, the applicants have entered the hearing. Maxwell, you now have control of the presentation. You just need to click on your screen. Perfect. You can advance the slides using your arrow keys or your mouse. Please state your name for the record and you may begin.
Thank you. My name is Maxwell Powell. I'm a partner at Buyer Blundell Architects. And good afternoon, and thank you for your time. We're here to discuss proposed modifications for 829 Madison Avenue, which is on the corner of 69th and Madison, built in 1885. Client acquired the property earlier this year and would like to improve the visibility and the accessibility of the ground floor and second floor retail, which is sort of the space that you kind of see behind the dark facade on the base of this building. So the project really consists of 2 primary scopes of work. The first scope of work involves general repair and restoration work, which we are working directly with LPC staff on. And the second scope of work is to redesign the base of the building, replacing the non-historic base with a design that's more appropriate in materials and in scale with the building above, while transforming the base to a design that's more suitable with the retailers of today and tomorrow. So again, the location is on the northeast corner of 69th and Madison Avenue, right on the corner over here. And the building's current condition with a little bit of the immediate context. So it's a 5-story building, designed in Queen Anne style, with a number of alterations that have occurred over the years. The upper stories is composed primarily of brick that's been painted over several times. There is some original brownstone detailing around the windows, as well as up at the dormers and this cornice line that you see between the 4th and the 5th floors. The ground floor consists of a black granite base that you can kind of see right here, with aluminum clad storefront. And then the second floor actually does have windows behind this black canvas screen that's been installed for a number of decades. Just a quick note about what's happening on the ground floor. So the ground floor entrance on Madison Avenue connects to the retail space that's sort of towards the front of the building, as well as connects up to the second floor. And then sort of mid-block or mid-building, there's another small retail space that's right here. And then there's a door to a lobby that brings you up to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floor tenant space. And then there's a restaurant on the far eastern end of the building. There are active tenants in the restaurant space, as well as the 3rd floor space here and the 4th and 5th floor. So we're not proposing to make any alterations to the facade there due to the active leases that are currently in place. So our focus is really the second floor and down, sort of where the darker storefront currently exists today. So just going back in the timeline a little bit, again, built in 1885, you can see that the building was originally designed as a single-family townhouse. Its entrance was actually on East 69th Street with sort of this stair that brought you up to the ground floor with an enclosure. The photo here in 1945 probably shows the original building in probably the best clarity over here. And you can see in that by this point, that enclosure was removed. And then by the 1960s, there were significant alterations that occurred to the building, partially due to the change of the building from a single family residence to one that was multifamily in the building, as well as the alterations that we see up and down Madison Avenue with the retail coming to Madison Avenue. So you can see that the entire base from the second floor down was completely removed. The cornice band was removed. The bay window was removed. The stair was removed, and a fairly modern facade was put in its place. In the 1980s, you can see that a fabric scrim or a screen was installed over the second floor windows, which sort of created this, I guess, signage backdrop for the tenants that existed there. So again, the designation photo from the 80s, again, showing the building painted black as well. And the note on the designation does note that the first two floors, have been altered for shops. The photo on the right is about a decade old, and it shows that the building got repainted again, back to more of a closer to a more traditional reddish brick color, which exists today. So this is just a diagram that summarizes the areas of modifications or alterations over time to the original building. So I think the largest area of modification, of course, is occurring on Madison Avenue, actually up and including the third floor. The entirety of the 69th Street facade on the first and second floors, as well as modifications to some of the windows where the windows got enlarged, and then some window replacements on the fourth and fifth floors. So these are some photos, very recent photos that we took. So we had, with Landmark's approvals, we did remove the black canvas screen on the second floor just so that we can get a better sense of the condition of the existing storefront, as well as sort of the relationship of that storefront relative to the building facade, as well as you can kind of see that here on the photos up above. And then the photos down below, this image here is the image of that small retail space sort of mid-building. This is the entry to the lobby of the building that would take you up to the third, fourth, and fifth floors. And then this is the restaurant. Again, we're not proposing any alterations to that space. So the other thing we did is to take a look at the Madison Avenue storefront master plan, as well as look for some examples of similar scaled buildings on corners on Madison Avenue and what has happened to the retail storefronts on those buildings. We found 5 examples that we'll go through here, but I just wanted to point out within the storefront master plan, this building in its indicates that its Madison Avenue frontage as well as its 69th Street frontage are denoted as green, in that there's no historic fabric or material behind it. And with respect to the 5 examples that I'll show you in a moment, those projects or those buildings also had predominantly green coating as well. So I think there's a little bit of a similarity in terms of how we're looking at this building relative to the examples that will follow. So the first example that we looked at was 690 Madison. So this was done, probably within the last decade on 62nd Street. And I think it's a good example of a couple of things, right? So one is sort of the use of brick on the base of the building on the first 2 floors as sort of a unifying element between the brick portion on the side street and the brownstone on Madison Avenue. I think it shows also a similar intent of trying to get a little bit more visibility on the corner with double height reading of the storefront, and also larger expanses of glass on the corner. But as the facade marches towards the park, the openings are a little bit narrower, right? And it sort of has a sort of more masonry and less glazing as we work our way down the side street. And I think the other important element to note is that there is a horizontal band, in this case with a metal band, a spandrel panel, that denotes the first and second floor, which I think is an important element throughout this district, but in particular in these buildings, that there is a sort of horizontal band, even if the space behind it is treated as a double height space, for instance. Another example is at 710 Madison Avenue, on 63rd Street, which similarly has an approach where we've got the sort of double height reading of the storefront. In this case, on the side street, this project has uniform openings along the side street. So there's sort of 4 uniform windows and uniform piers marching down the side street. But again, a considerable amount of glazing on the corner, as well as the band that you see on between the first and second floors. 740 Madison, another example here of a more prominent retail corner, in this case, squaring off the arched windows up above, and again, double height reading with that important band between the first and second floors. Another example on 791 Madison, getting a little bit closer to our site here. Again, sort of this double height reading, but I think in this case, the difference here is that the storefront of Madison Avenue is really quite transparent with sort of minimal metal in that storefront, and then along the side street, sort of a little bit more variation on the size of the openings. And then finally, we make our way up to 827 Madison Avenue, which is actually directly across the street from this project. So it's on the southeast corner of the intersection, where there's a very sort of transparent corner with sort of 2 openings, double height openings that are similar to each other, and then smaller storefront openings down the side street as you move further east. I think that the difference here from what I'll show you as part of our proposal is that I think this project has a more planar look to it, right? And I think it's partially with sort of the material choice in terms of the enframetment, but also in the way that they treated the band between the first and second floors. The band is actually more subtle in this option, in this building, in that it's part of the glass system. So I think, for what we were trying to do at 829 Madison Avenue is to really take a look and try to bring a base back to the building and add some depth to what we're trying to propose here. So this is the view on Madison Avenue. On the left is the existing condition, the modeled condition of the existing building. On the right is the proposed design of the storefront on the first and second floors. And I think, for us, it was really, trying to balance the challenge of trying to increase some visibility on this important corner, but also to add a little bit of depth and detail to the facade as well. So we're proposing a double height enframetment. So the brick would go around and create a sort of double height reading, but within that, the storefront infill will be sort of divided up so that it sort of reads as 2 levels, right? And with the decorative spandrel panel that's right here between the first and second floor, and then just a very simple sort of symmetrical infill within the storefront. We're on the side street on 69th Street. You can see again on the left the existing condition, and on the right the proposed condition. So again, with this, we're proposing to also have a slightly larger opening that's similar to the opening on the Madison Avenue side towards the corner, but then have a more regularized and narrower cadence of openings as we move towards the east, right? So it starts to scale down as we work our way towards, the center of the side street, essentially. The other important thing is that we are reintroducing a cornice band right below the 3rd floor windows, which is where the original cornice was on the building, which I think really helps in terms of the scale of the base of the building and how you read the base of the building relative to the rest of the building that exists. So just putting it all together so you can see both the Madison Avenue facade and the 69th Street facade on the right here, you get a sense of how the 2 facades start to interact with each other. So at the base of the building, we are proposing a new brick, a face brick, that will have a limited range. It'll be a smooth brick, but with a tiny bit of texture. So there's a little bit of variation, but it's not a glazed brick. And we're intending that this brick to be darker than the existing coated brick above that's going to remain. And part of that is to sort of differentiate between the new and the existing. But we believe it's also a good transition as well, with the base being a little bit different from the upper portion of the building. On the existing portion of the building where the brick is currently coated, we will be working with staff to review the condition of the brick. We are going to strip all of the paint off of the existing brick and see how it is, right? We're going to do repairs. Any cracked brick will be replaced, there'll be repointing done. And I think at that point, with staff, we'll review whether or not the existing brick is consistent enough that we can just leave, or if not, then we would propose to recoat the brick in a similar color to maintain a differentiation between the base and the upper floors. In terms of the repair and replacement aspects for the project as well, we are going to be working with staff on miscellaneous repair work. Of note, I did want to point out that we are going to be replacing 9 windows, so 3 on Madison, 4 here on 69th Street, and the 2 windows on the dormers that are currently casement windows, and they will now be replaced back to a double hung condition that will, be consistent with all the other openings that are historic to the building. And then finally, we are going to also propose that we are going to replace the existing synthetic slate roofing with new synthetic slate roofing, along with new snow guards and tabs, for the protection of pedestrians down below. All right. And then just looking at the axon, you can kind of get a sense of the proposed condition on the right. On the left is actually a diagram. One of the reasons why there are some vertical piers that are showing up on the ground floor is that we're trying to hide existing columns and structure that's currently existing in the facades. So we're trying to maintain all of the structure that's there, that's holding up the building right now, and work around that to make sure that that the design is harmonious, both from an aesthetic point of view and an appropriateness point of view, but also with the existing structure of the building as well. So it's very carefully integrated. And then just a material palette to give you a sense again of the materials. I did speak about most of this. So the first 2 floors will have a new brick that we're proposing here. It's a brownstone brick that's blended. It's a modular size. The base of the building will have a granite base in a flame finish. Right, that will just kind of run on both of the facades. All of the storefront windows and frames will be aluminum in a dark bronze finish. And then up above, we are proposing a new GFRC cornice in a matching brownstone color to match all the other brownstone on the building. And then, as I mentioned, we are replacing the snow guards up above and the roofing. And then we have proposed the proposed brick coating color that we would be proposing if we need to recoat the upper portions of the building. And then just finally, just a few details that we start to put together, and you can kind of get a sense of how complicated this is relative to the existing structure that you can kind of see that we're trying to hide and mask within the design as well. But you can kind of get a sense of a little of detail, and just trying to get a little bit of depth and sort of shadow casting on the storefront, despite the sort of very minimal space that we have to work with on the facade. And then this is the 69th Street side, and we're just showing the detail of the decorative grille, which is just a very simple bronze colored grille that would be mounted at each of the spandrels with the potential for pin mounted signage on top of those spandrels. It's sort of a natural place for that. And then just finally, the comparison of the existing versus the proposed condition. I think our approach really was to, try to improve the visibility of the retail and the experience of the street level while creating refined and appropriate modifications based on the building, using materials and hues that, adds back a sense of scale to the base of the building, which, really has been missing for many, many decades. So thank you for your time. I know it's late in the day, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Commissioner Chen, please go ahead.
Yeah, in terms of the question on this rendering, the top of the new brick on the 69th Street side, why did you decide on that datum? If you look at the existing on the left versus the sheet 17, where the window, the bottom of the window sill sort of float on the existing design versus the new datum sort of moved it way too high, in my opinion.
Yeah, so there's a couple of reasons for that. The original building had a datum right below the windows, so the sills would remain for the 3rd floor windows, but the datum of the band is below it. I can go back to that detail as well. The other reason why we did that is when they made the modification to the modern storefront that was here, they also replaced the brick that's right below the 3rd floor window. So part of what we're trying to do is actually not only bring the datum back up and give a sense of scale to the building as well, but also to replace this, non-historic brick that's at that location at the same time.
I see. Thanks.
Okay, Commissioner Chapin?
The restaurant I see is not part of the application. Actually, I've been to that restaurant. I think that the rendering makes the color look a little more purple and, standing out sharply. It's actually kind of a more dusty blue, I think.
Yeah,
I'm just wondering because obviously having that be bronze or something would have matched better with the building, but it's not part of your application. Correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Yes, Commissioner Jefferson, please go ahead.
It's a very interesting looking at the historical building and this new project, in that the original was a form and picturesque window placement. This one, the base becomes rational. The middle is picturesque and the top is picturesque. It's an interesting look at Madison Avenue where the combination of architectural ideas start to create this kind of image. It's just an aside of looking at it.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else? All right. I don't see any other questions at this time. So let's move to public testimony. If you're in the meeting and would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand so we can identify you. And I will turn it over to Gregory to take us through the testimony.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We received a couple of signups beforehand, so we'll be going through those first. The first of which is Nuha Ansari from Friends of Upper East Side. So Nuha, I will be promoting you to panelist right now. So if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Chair Carroll and Honourable Commissioners, my name is Nuha Ansari and I'm speaking on behalf of the Friends of the Upper East Side Historic Districts. Friends Preservation Committee appreciates the thoughtful consideration given to the structure and materials of the original row house and the current context of the surrounding double-height Madison Avenue storefronts in the development of the proposal. In addition, we welcome the planned preservation work to remedy prior LPC violations, including repair of the roof, removal of paint and repointing of the brick facade, and the replacement of casement windows with double-hung windows. While we commend the architects for the harmonious character of their storefront design and its referencing of the original townhouse in reintroducing masonry cladding and a cornice on the facade, Friends is concerned that the brick piers, even though darker in color, appear too similar to the brickwork on the upper floors. In many other Madison Avenue storefronts, the materials used for the storefront bump out create a strong differentiation between the retail spaces and the floors above. In this case, a change in materials would also be more in keeping with the character of the original row house with its rusticated base. We also question the roof of GFRC for the string course above the retail storefront, rather than stone or terracotta. We urge the Commission to take our concerns into consideration and ask the architects to work to fine-tune the proposal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Nuha. And next we will be hearing from Lucy Levine from HDC. So Lucy, I'll be promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Lucy Levine. I'm speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. This proposal, while generally appropriate, could benefit from additional study. The applicant could explore a heavier cornice on the addition and consider greater articulation of the masonry and pilasters to make the addition more in keeping with the Queen Anne style. Additionally, we find the precedent image of 740 Madison Avenue to be useful for further study. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Lucy. Okay. And looking through, it doesn't seem as though we have any other hands raised. So I will note for the record that Manhattan Community Board 8 recommends approval of the full application exclusive of the awnings and denial of the design of the awnings. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to turn back to the applicant and ask if you'd like to respond to the comments we've heard.
Sure. I mean, with respect to the community board comment about the awnings, we did remove that from the scope of work as well. So we did modify that. I think with respect to the tone of the brick, we did work with staff to make the brick at the base darker. We do believe that having a differentiation between the upper portion of the building relative to the base of the building is important.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, do we have any further questions? All right, not seeing any questions. I'm going to send you all requests to unmute so that we can move to our discussion. All right, Commissioner Holford-Smith, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Goldblum, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in
Oops.
favor? Oh, that's okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion. And as many of you know, although it may not be so familiar because so many storefront applications are handled at staff level on Madison Avenue, but the commission has established a master plan that allows for staff level approvals of storefront infill within existing openings. And that really sort of grew out of the time of designation when the district was being designated. It was recognized that many of these storefronts had their stoops removed and had their bases converted to commercial use, often with 2-story bump outs. There are a few 3-story bump outs. And those storefront extensions often didn't relate to the upper floors and had their own vocabulary. And that Madison Avenue was very vibrant and dynamic because of these retail changes that happened so regularly. But it also recognized that because the changes happened so regularly, that there was little historic fabric. And so the principles behind the Madison Avenue master plan are that the staff can approve new storefront infill with a lot of flexibility in terms of design. There's very little design criteria, unlike other storefront rules for other places in the city. But the sort of principles that are respected in the criteria are the 2-story scale. And so while we allow double height openings, the Madison Avenue master plan does require a horizontal spandrel in order to get staff level, that the plane of the street wall be maintained and that there be transparency into the storefront. But other than that, there are no requirements in terms of heights of bulkheads or proportions or framing details or even finish. So that is the context in which the staff level approvals take place along Madison Avenue. So something for you to consider as you think about this particular application, which in many ways what is happening within these openings follows. And so this is really before us today because of the change in the openings and the material at the base. And so we'll begin our discussion on this and I encourage you to discuss all aspects of it, but I just wanted to give you some context for the infill and how as it relates to the Madison Avenue master plan and the staff level approvals along Madison Avenue. And the comments about the roof and the windows at the upper floors and even the question of coating the brick, that is all being resolved at staff level. So our comments should focus on the material, the proportions, and appropriateness of the changes to the 2 lower floors. So with that, I'll turn it over to Adi. Commissioner Shamir Baran, would you start this one?
Sure. I think that it makes sense to me that obviously that that Madison Avenue would have this master plan that you just described because the changes to the avenue and the departure from the previous townhomes was so dramatic and sort of total that any subsequent changes, never bring it back to its original to the original buildings. And so those changes get to sort of live in their own in their own domain, and I think it makes perfect sense for the staff to be able to manage those changes and the kind of many of them as they occur. So in that sense, what's left to us, it seems, and this is not, or like what's interesting to me in responding to the applicant's proposal here, is actually sort of a refinement of the design or the set of proportions that they've begun to use on this ground, on the sort of the base piece. And with respect to that, I mean, the question of how tall that base piece is a question. That relationship that once existed to the bottom of the windows has changed pretty dramatically, but I think that that's acceptable. What I think is, again, as it relates to the proportion, is that it seems to me that there needs to be a bit more material or fabric in that, and the brick is acceptable to me, unlike some of the testimony, in the top of the windows, meaning that there should be more brick, that the openings potentially should be a bit lower, that the spandrel pieces should begin lower. And continuing with that, sort of related to that logic, but not exactly, I think that the actual base piece, which they described as granite, the kind of granite is sort of weak. It's too short, it's too thin, especially as it's a completely different material. And I actually think that the original, if there is a vestige of the old that might be interesting in terms of kind of bringing in another system on this at the ground level here, it's the old datum of the previous stoop, or of what defined the kind of the basement of the very old building. And maybe, and while that does not relate to the spandrel that they're proposing right now, it might begin to define a kind of a very tall base piece instead of the existing granite bulkhead base that they describe, which is what it looks like. It's about a little bit over maybe a foot. So it should be taller. But anyway, I think that old line might want to come back. Overall, I think that the approach is good and pretty much acceptable, but I would ask that we discuss and that they consider changes to, again, this kind of the proportional approach to the facade.
Okay, thank you. And I do understand from Corey that actually we do have to review the alternative slate material here, because at the time of designation, there was slate on the roof. Is that correct, Corey?
Correct. There was some original slate. There was an approval to replace that with original slate. It was done with synthetic slate. So the applicants are proposing to do that.
We do need to comment on the use of the faux slate.
Yes.
I never am interested in it. So, although here there was faux slate, yes? So what are we saying here? Replacing the faux slate with faux slate, or?
Yes, it's currently synthetic slate. Years back, there was some remaining original slate. I don't even know that it was the part you could see from the street, and the permit allowed them to replace that in kind. Instead, it was done with synthetic slate. So we're kind of trying to bring that up to speed now by reviewing it today.
So at the time of designation, there was some portion of it that was slate, but not the entire roof.
I see. Well, it would be terrific if it could be real slate, but I think in this case, the synthetic slate, since only a small portion existed at the time of designation, it's acceptable for it to be synthetic slate again.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. All right, Commissioner Holford-Smith.
I'll just continue on that topic. I think also, given the height of the slate roof from where you perceive it from the street, that it's acceptable to use the synthetic material here. The storefront, I think I understand Audie's concern about the proportion. It's a little sort of jarring next to the more fanciful upper elevation. It's a little stark, and but I think the opening sizes to me seemed okay. What I'm finding, I agree actually with her comment about the base. I thought that as well, that the base is much too low. Maybe that could just help to give it a little more grounding if it was a much taller base. And I think also if the cornice could be a little more hefty as well. It feels like there's not enough going on. It's like it's sort of not completely modern enough, and it's not historical. So I think it needs a little bit more oomph to marry it to the more exuberant building.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Commissioner Chapin?
I agree that it's okay to use the alternative slate. And you know, I think that actually I'm okay with the base because it's the Madison Avenue district, and many of the, as I recall, many of the retail storefronts really are pretty light and open because that's kind of a characteristic of this district. So I think it's, I could approve it as presented, actually.
Thank you. And I think that the applicant also showed examples of other openings that are similarly proportioned. Commissioner Goldblum?
Thank you. This is an interesting little tough project because in a funny way, they're trying to be better. And by trying to be better, they're getting themselves in trouble, right? If you look at the examples of the other buildings that they showed us, those architects basically said, I don't care about the buildings up above. I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to make something that is a reflection of my retailer's marketing aims, whether it's high classical or postmodern or whatever flavor in between. They were blithely disregarding of the building above. BBB, being BBB, is trying very hard to not do that and not be rude and not be inappropriate. And as a result, they're kind of straddling the fence in terms of, does this base belong to the building above or doesn't it? And the use of brick and the use of the GFRC cornice all kind of signal, I want to join the building above. And that's where I think the friction is occurring, because we're joining it with one hand, but we're really not with the other. So I'm okay with a blithe disregard because that is the nature of this district and that is the intention of the regulation. However, I would be much happier personally as a commissioner if they pushed the connection to the building a little bit more strongly, because I think that would be a better job both for the retailer and for the building and for the district. And that could be done by looking at the brick. Maybe brick isn't the right material. Maybe you use a rusticated, sandstone, or maybe you use the coins. I mean, there's lots of ways to pull that facade down and to look at the old facade and maybe use an arch. I don't know. There's a million ways to do it. All of the tools are well seated within BBB's arsenal to tie the building together a little bit more with the building it's underneath. And if they seek to really go the other way, I think the problem is the three windows on the side are kind of almost matching the scale and almost aligning with or suggesting a relationship to the side facade that I think feels neither here nor there to me. So I think that since it sounds like the majority of people are signaling that they would like another shot, I mean, I could approve it as being appropriate as is, but I think that it could be better and would be better if, in reaction to the other commissioners' comments.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me, Commissioner Chen?
Yeah, Michael put it succinctly. I think, relative to the rest of Madison Avenue compared to the other cases that the applicant submitted, this is acceptable. But in the case of trying to do one step better, that's a judgment call. I will leave it to the rest of the commissioners to see, more tinkering and more, it's a judgment call. So I would defer to the majority.
Okay, Commissioner Jefferson?
it is an interesting facade issue. The left-hand side where the base is, I think it's much nicer in proportion to the right-hand side. And it just makes the upper level, it just creates the, what I call the proportions are better, especially with the fireplace coming down and the relationship of that vertical to the edge, that kind of thing. I think that they did a wonderful job in trying to get shadows. They did a really great job in trying to get a depth to that lower facade. And the only other issue I have is the corner. The corner is so thick. If it was smaller, it's almost as wide as the window on Madison. If it was thinner and not so bold, it's something they should give some thought to.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Gustafson.
Wow. I think I've heard eight or nine different criticisms that suggested it would be extremely difficult for the staff to work this one out. That said, let's go back to first principles here. It's a huge improvement over the unsympathetic thing that's there. So it's got an attraction just for that reason. I think for me, I've gotten used to the contrast between the base and the upper floors on Madison Avenue when they are radically different. And so when it's the only difference is the dark brick to the light brick, it doesn't seem to be taking on, and I guess Michael said this, it's neither fish nor fowl. It's not taking on enough of the feeling of the building as it was and not varying enough the other way. If it's going to turn around and say, I'm going to ignore you, it didn't do that. So honestly, I think we'd be better off with a second effort on this.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for your comments. I think this gets an A for effort, and I do think that it really does follow the kind of the principles behind the Madison Avenue master plans, which really recognize the kind of vibrant and dynamic quality on Madison Avenue. But I think that, and so I think that it is really consistent with that. But I am hearing a lot of comments about some suggested changes, either to make it connect more to the building or to be more different. And those suggestions have to do with tweaking the base height, the cornice, the portions of the piers between the windows. And so we'll ask the applicant to think about their approach and respond. I think they can, sort of push it either way. And that may be just a matter of tweaks and refinements, or it can be something else if they choose. So we'll leave it open. We won't take an action today, and we'll ask the applicant to come back, which may be, some minor refinements, or maybe something else if they choose. So thank you. And that concludes our agendas today. So thank you all very much for all of your hard work in 2022 and the years beyond or before. And I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season and a happy new year. And we'll see everybody on January 10th.